Welcome to CandleLight Audiobook. Chapter 221. The Count had not yet answered, but the Countess handed him the divorce papers, and the Count's eyes shook like waves as he confirmed that all but his signature had been filled. She was the only woman who had protected him from suffering from his children, and he seemed to hesitate to sign divorce papers, no matter how much she wanted to protect her property. "I need money to live with you in the future. You are not in good health, and the cost of treatment is enormous. If you're so lost in your mind, you might really have to sit on the street." But the Countess's continued persuasion forced him to lift his pen. "How could I not sign the papers to live with you? How do I submit it? And I need the consent of His Highness. When you were a nobleman, you needed it, but I found out that you are now a commoner, deprived of your title, so you just need the confirmation of a person who is in charge and a witness." At the same time, as she was finished, two strangers entered the Count's room. "Who are they?" "They came out of court. You couldn't move, so they came to the mansion themselves. They are very kind. And this is Lyra, a witness." Asher was especially careful about this so that Celine was not to be damaged. Of course, it was ridiculous to divorce to get away with the property ahead of a major ruling, but it was possible because of Asher's permission. A fairly old person checked the divorce papers completed by the Count's signature and finally confirmed them. "Does your mind remain unchanged in divorce?" "Yes, please, finish it as soon as possible." Unlike the determined Countess, the Count seemed to hesitate a little. It was so strange that as soon as she brought up the divorce story, all the documents, as well as the lawyers in charge, appeared. It was as if she had been doing this for a long time. "Come on, honey, you have to think about our future." "I feel sick too." The Countess took the Count's hand and said softly, "There is no other way," and persuaded him. The Count, knowing it, hesitated a little, but nodded and affirmed. "Okay, and I'll finish the divorce procedure with this, and you are now legally separated from this moment on." The Countess let go of the Count's hand without hesitation as soon as he said that. The Countess, who had changed her face to the cold one, said her last goodbye to the Count. "I've been so grateful, financially, but I've never been satisfied with anything else." With the cold face of the Countess, which he had never seen before, his eyes were wide and hardened. "You, Darian, and Lyra have always ignored me, but I have tried to neglect for money, but you have not a penny left, so isn't it natural that we should divorce?" Her honesty made the Count barely speak, unable to control his trembling body. "What do you mean?" No pennies? You've prepared a villa and some real estate for the future." "Yes, under my name. It's my share, not related to you anymore." "Don't be so unfair. Even if you want to have them, they will be confiscated into the Empire. You can think of it as alimony, for my troubled life." The Countess, who had left the words, was about to turn and leave as if she had no more business. How could you do this to me?" The Count shouted with all his might to her back. He had been betrayed by his real family, and he was now betrayed by the last one, and he shouted with a sick body as if he were insane. The Countess turned and said her last words. "Well, you should have been good around when you had much, not after you became partially paralyzed. Are you sorry now that you lost all your family?" The Countess thought that the Count was responsible for all this. He was the root of all these problems. If he had only been good to Celine and her mother when they had first entered the Count family in the first place, this terrible catastrophe would not have happened. They are of humble origin, but they are a family now, so let's get along. If he had said something like that and comforted his own children, he wouldn't have faced this terrible catastrophe. But he had ignored the Countess of humble origin without realizing it and had not stopped Darian and Lyra's rudeness, and so the whole house members seemed to think that it was the right thing to do. It was too late for the Count, who had become so lonely after the Countess had left. Wait. Don't go. Please. Please don't leave me. I'm sorry about everything." In the empty room where no one was, only the cries of the Count came up. The divorce of the Countess had led to Celine and the Countess's move. There was no reason to live more in the Count's mansion, where only terrible memories were all. It was smaller than the Count's, but the beautiful house was made up of the Count's money and became their new home. The precious ornaments in the corners of the mansion showed how rich the owner was. Celine, who had been living on the third floor, was hurrying to prepare for going out ahead of important work, and Annie, who was helping her to get changed, said excitedly, "How can I thank you for bringing all the servants of the Count's?" "That's right. They are well paid than before and everyone is so happy." Jessica added the words, and Annie agreed with her. "All the mansions of the other nobles who have committed treason are in a mess, and we are the only ones who are all right." Celine replied as if she were tired of hearing that, when Annie was so happy, taking a good side. "Annie, if I hear about that a few more times, it'll be 100 times. Miss, that's because I'm so happy. They're only all quiet in front of you and the master, and do you know how much they're talking about behind you? You and the master must be saints." At that, her mouth went up, and the long shadowy title of the wicked woman was now perfectly changed to the saint, and it followed her, and even her mother, who had brought all the servants. Celine's gaze fell on the hourglass in the cabinet, which had been first used to splash water and laugh on Lyra, but she had not used it at some point. And that was when she had begun to feel happy, when she had started living a life loved by Asher, recognized by others, and respected by someone without using the hourglass to go back to the past. If life lasts forever without the use of the hourglass, hoping that, she said to Annie, my mother would be happy to hear that. Do you think she would? Shall I tell her? You'll do that, and if you talk as you pass, she'll blush. She had never heard that before. A prostitute becomes a saint. It is a contradiction. Celine was laughing at the thought, but she heard a voice outside the room. Miss, the wagon is ready. It was almost time to finish the preparations and comb her hair, so she finished and got up and checked through a large mirror. She could not decorate herself because it was a place where someone was executed, so she refrained from decorating herself as much as possible, but she did not like it when she checked it in the mirror. It was the place she would meet him for a long time because she had not seen Asher, who had been busy. Now her appearance was not the only thing that she could impose, but sometimes it had been fun to see Asher's eyes that he couldn't help himself as he was not able to be attracted to her beautiful appearance, so she thought it would be better to dress a little more. Shall I bring the headdress? Yeah. Jessica, who quickly grasped her expression, prepared a small tiara, and though she still did not like it, she finished her dress, saying it was better than before. Isn't it too simple? The Countess, no, Karen said, who was waiting for Celine, when she went downstairs. Karen was her real name that had been hidden under the pseudonym, Apple, which had been named by people around when she had been a prostitute. After becoming alone, she regained her original name and was called Karen, and she was dressed as if she were going to a party. Chapter 222. Mother, are you going to a party somewhere? At the question of Celine, she replied, laughing loudly. Then what else would it be? You are right. Yes, I am going to the place where Julia would mourn loudly and disappear, whom I had to turn the hourglass to be able to talk when I first met. Julia would be beheaded so ugly, like my old self. Celine, who smiled a little and affirmed this, climbed into the carriage with Karen, and a splendid, luxurious carriage, which could not be considered a commoner's, ran quickly toward her destination. The mansion was located near the busy street, and it was not long before it arrived in the square. There was still a little time until the beginning, but a crowd of people surged toward it, and each one started to look at the colorful carriage that did not have a stamp on. Oh, my God, it's Miss Celine. I thought I'd see her when I come here, but I can't believe she really came. How beautiful she is. I can't believe she's a commoner now. What do you mean? She's a commoner for a while, for she's so well with the crown prince. Soon she'll be the crown princess. And as she got out of the wagon, the bystanders raised their voices and couldn't hide their admiration as if their guesses were correct. Celine waved and greeted them with a big, happy smile, and their voices grew louder and her ears ached. Huh. So Karen laughed, covering her mouth with her fan, and was about to follow the knights who were waiting in advance. You're here. I was waiting. How can you make a king of a country wait? A familiar voice sounded and Celine turned her head, and there was Lohan, smiling and standing there. Mr. Lohan? Didn't you go back to Croa? I can't help but come on such an important day. It was Lohan who answered so, but he smiled a faint smile as if he was planning something else. And Chloe, murmured Karen with a surprise, who stood beside Celine, looking after Lohan. Chloe? I've heard of the name somewhere, so Celine also turned, following Karen, and she hardened as if time had stopped. He looked so beautiful enough to admire. Why? Why does someone exist who resembles me so much? It was strange indeed. Their gender and age were different, but it was as if she was looking at herself in the mirror. Celine was staring at him with a shock, lost her words for a moment, and carefully asked Chloe's identity. Who are you? Well. Karen, who was beside her, hesitated to answer as if it hadn't been planned in advance, and Chloe, the person directly involved, looked a little embarrassed. Lohan asked Chloe, furrowing his forehead. Did you come to tell her? I told you before, but I didn't mean to talk about it on the street. It was a space where they had prepared to help Celine to park her wagon, and had arranged nights, but it was open without being closed, and the gaze of the spectators followed. And even though she was a humble woman, she had a great success which would last long in history and had a scandal with the crown prince. Therefore, they were paying much attention to her every insignificant move. I never meant to rush out like this. That's because Lady Celine showed up, but you were just watching from afar. Your Majesty, as I said, I was going to ask for her understanding and move to the other place. So when he answered with a tone that said he'd ruined, he twisted his eyebrows subtly. Yes, I see. You mean, I'm not needed now that you've found her? That's too much. I found her. When Chloe didn't answer as if it was true, Lohan was angry, but none of them was soothing him, and he had to remit his anger himself. No way, I don't suppose. Celine couldn't hide her surprised face, as if she had guessed, after hearing their conversation. It was because she had just remembered the story of her biological father. Karen had asked. Mother. Celine called Karen to get her confirmation. Even though the answer was fixed, she hesitated to answer, because she didn't want to say it so suddenly. As she hesitated to answer, Chloe also dared not to speak. There was no answer, but Celine was convinced that she did not deny, tried to say something, paused and looked around in strangely silent surroundings. Yes, that's right. If I'm right, it's not something we should talk about here. Everyone was listening, even the knights who were waiting on a little distance. They might have the same thoughts about Chloe and Celine, who looked so much alike. Well, you'll have to talk about going back to Croa, so it's hard to tell the story here. Going back to Croa? Who? Who else could it be, except you two? Me and my mother. Why? Lohan, who had delayed the answer, smiled lightly and Celine frowned, and now she realized that Lohan had called Chloe as an heir of someone. Is he a nobleman? He moves with a king of a country, and is he of quite a high status? But why is he called an heir, not by his title? It is common to inherit a title, after 5 to 10 years since someone becomes an adult. So, did Karen ask me what if I had my biological father who would help me? It seemed more complicated than she had thought. She was curious enough to want to postpone seeing the end of Julia. Lady Celine? What are you doing here? As she passed the time, Asher approached her as if he had arrived in advance, because despite the fact that the protagonist of the day was not her, but the crowd was looking at her. Asher, who had been waiting impatiently for this day with great expectation, approached Celine with a very pleasant face, and quickly hardened his face when he found Chloe and Lohan. And Celine realized that he also knew everything. Mr. Asher, you even knew it, too. Asher swallowed, embarrassed by the cold words of Celine, and Karen hurriedly defended him. I asked him to pretend not to know it, as I'll tell you. I think you should hear this kind of story from me. I suppose so. It was better to hear the secret family story from her mother than her lover. Celine understood the situation, that when Karen had worried about when to speak and had only set a date, but Lohan, who could not bear it, had come out and created this fuss. Her mother had been busy with a lot of work in the meanwhile, so she had to worry and be careful enough. Okay, I've finished guessing, but after seeing the end of the bad guys who I have waited for years, we'll talk about it. I think our new mansion would be good for it. Chloe's face brightened at that, because of the joy of visiting the place where the woman and his daughter he had so painted, lived. May I come with you? Asher asked cautiously, looking quite worried. He seemed to be worried about Celine, who suddenly had a biological father, and about what she would do after hearing that. Perhaps Celine would go to the kingdom of Croa like Lohan's wish. Yes, if you have time, as long as you don't care. You are also involved in this matter. You might soon be a family. As she affirmed, Asher's expression brightened. Now the sentence will be executed soon, so you'd better move. As Asher said, they could see wagons carrying sinners, and the crowd of spectators threw stones and cursed, but there was no sound from inside as if they had suffered a great deal of hardship in prison. There are some people who will be executed, and will you leave first, after seeing the sentence? Asher asked her because the sight of another's head falling might later be a trauma. Among the knights, there were several who saw someone die and suffered from mental suffering. No, I appreciate your concern, but I'm as excited as you are about it, so I can't leave first. I had an experience that my head was cut off, but what is the big deal? After Celine's answer, they moved to a place where they could see the execution well. It was decided to publicly punish the sinners without informing them of what punishment they would have. The execution was carried out at the same time, to inform the rebels that the miserable end was waiting. Chapter 223. Despite the number of sinners, there was only one guillotine installed in the square a few days before the execution, and rumors were saying that Julia was being executed alone. Julia had not slept yet after hearing it somewhere, and her look was getting haggard as days went by. Come out. Move. Dozens of knights, who had come in without a word, opened the door of the prison and pulled the sinners out. The sinners were all dragged out of fear because they did not tell them what punishment they would have. In the meantime, the meals had not been provided in time and the heating facility was not installed even in the middle of winter, so they were not good as well as Julia. There were a lot of people who were sick of the harsh environment they had never experienced before, or who were unable to walk properly due to frostbite, and that was also true of Lyra. My head hurts so much. My feet, too, sob. Darian rushed to support Lyra, who was stumbling. It was an unacceptable act because they were moving in a line, but it was not stopped because it was clear that Lyra would fall and become more annoying if they left it. Just hold on, Lyra. We will be back in the house soon. Brother. Darian was convinced because he believed in his lawyer and Celine. He didn't know that Celine was the starting point of this incident. All of the prisoners were taken to the square by wagons made of iron that they had ridden when they had been first taken to prison. Whether the fact that today was the day of execution had spread throughout the capital, there were plenty of spectators on the way to the plaza. You bastards. You are the shame of the empire. All the goodwill you've enjoyed so far is from selling the empire. The onlookers threw stones or cursed at the traitors who had lost their titles, and the carriage moved slowly as if to fan the flames. The sinners were not even able to refute, so they waited quietly for the carriage to stop. Get out. Then in the square, a huge crowd was waiting for them. It was like everyone in the capital gathered there. They had not made any other space to block the spectators, so as they got out of the wagon and moved, hands that stretched out somewhere tormented them and grabbed their hair. Yeah. Julia was pushed to the ground by someone's hand. She glared at the person who pushed her with her malicious eyes. No matter how haggard she was as a sinner, she had been living as the supreme noblewoman in the empire for nearly 20 years. The person who met her eyes quickly lowered his head and avoided her gaze. Brother. Lyra, who had felt such strong hostility for the first time, was terrified by Darian's arms, and Darian followed the man in front of him, protecting his sister as much as he could. They moved for a moment and was able to reach the execution hall in the square. All sinners, stand in line. The high-ranking nobleman, who had stood on the side of the royal family for a long time and had been confronted with the nobles of the aristocratic party, ordered. The sinners with hostility hesitated and did not move, and eventually, the knights who were waiting around used force. Some of the nobles who fell under the strong power of the knights cried out that their arms were hurt. But then they closed their mouths again, looking at a knight that came up with a harsh expression and went back to their place in a hurry. You still think you're a nobleman, and if you know what punishment you're going to get, you'll faint with surprise, the nobleman said as if he was so pleased to punish the sinners. What kind of punishment would it be? The nobleman had been always anxious to kill them, and if he wanted to, the punishment would come close to execution. And the sinners, who believed that there was a chance to get out of this incident, began to tremble in fear, and Lohan intervened to mediate that he should stop harassing them. I fully understand why the Count is happy, but I have something more important to do than this, so I hope you'll get it done quickly. Everybody's eyes turned to Lohan as he said that there was something more important than the lives of dozens of people, but he looked bored by the troubles of another country. Mr. Lohan, don't say that because it's important to someone. Celine, who was next to him, scolded him, and their gaze moved naturally to her. Celine laughed slightly as if she was laughing at those who had accused her of being a prostitute's daughter, and now she was laughing at Julia, who was about to face the same fate as her miserable past. At her smile, which she deliberately provoked, Julia gritted her teeth. How dare you, you woman of vulgar origin? So, as Julia, who had not overcome her anger, as usual, accused Celine, and Lohan rose from his seat, wondering how she told such thoughtless words even as a sinner. You're still saying that? He seemed quite annoying to hear that because Celine was now the star of Croa, not of the Empire. Lohan. He would rather have a knight shut up than deal with such an ugly woman. As he stepped out of his seat and approached Julia, Asher gave him a small warning, but he did not stop. He went quickly to Julia, looking rather glad. Look straight, Julia, the one beside Lady Celine, who you always laughed at because of her humble origin. He went nearby and ridiculed, pointing quietly to Celine's seat in a voice that only Julia could hear. Julia, who had been shriveling as if she thought he was going to hit her, suddenly moved her eyes in the direction he pointed. She was a bit relieved that she could move her eyes somewhere else. There was a very unexpected figure there. A nobleman who had suddenly disappeared when Lohan had visited the Duke's mansion, saying that he had a business to do. The nobleman who looked very much like Celine, who she had asked for an answer from Lyra but who had made her feel uneasy because Lyra had said that she did not know. He looked more like Celine than he had been away from her, like a family. No way. Yes, you're right. Now you are downgraded as a commoner, so don't you dare say that she is vulgar. As if she had recognized Chloe's relationship with Celine, she shivered so much that she couldn't control herself. It meant that the only flaw in Celine was no longer a flaw. Don't be surprised yet. Do you know which family and Lady Celine are connected to? You've met, too. It is Marquis Renard. And Chloe, who is next to Celine, is the only son of the Marquis, and at the same time, the son of Violet, who was once a royal family, and you should know this before you die. How much you've been making fun of your tongue wrong. Is that man the son of Violet and the Marquis of Renard, who had been royal in the past? Julia was able to recall the rumors about Chloe. It was a very old story, and she could not think of it properly, but she remembered that a woman from the kingdom of Croa had a child, who had an extramarital affair. So she was banished from the empire with her child. Julia blinked her trembling eyelashes and put her mind together. So, Violet, who had been married to the imperial royal family in the past, had an affair with the Marquis of Croa, Renard, and the child they had was Celine's father, Chloe, and he is a nobleman? If that was true, Celine, who was a commoner because the Vermont family had disappeared due to treason, was not married yet, and would follow her father's blood to become the lady of the Marquis of Renard, unlike herself, who had been moving non-stop as the eldest daughter of the Duke family, but had fallen into hell because of the crown prince. Boom! Julia's heart sank at once. But at the same time, she wondered. Why? How could he say that she was the blood of the Marquis of Renard? By all means, Celine's mother was a humble prostitute. A vulgar woman who had spent her nights with a lot of men. She was not a woman who continued to have a sexual relationship with one man. How do you check the blood of a prostitute? Chapter 224. So, when she asked, Lohan looked at Julia with a look of pity. Don't you see that they are a father and a daughter after looking at their faces? Even a dog that passes by can see it at once. Well, if not, there's another way. You don't know because you have never been invited by Asher to the pond of the imperial castle, but it's very easy to judge the royal family. What is it? Well, it's not a secret that is needed to be hidden so much, so I suppose I can tell you. There's a pond in the imperial castle, which only those who have succeeded the royal blood or who have been married and drunk holy water can enter. You know that. Of course, the child born by the woman who drank the holy water can also be recognized as a royal and enter it. They said that anyone couldn't take out the holy water out of the pond without the emperor's permission. You mean that woman has been in that pond? That woman? Don't talk too freely. Are you insane? How do you believe such a ridiculous superstition? How do you know that, above all, as the king of another country? Lohan said with a sigh at Julia's reaction that she could not believe anything. You still don't feel how close I am to Asterope. It was when Asher was about 10 years old. Asher was nearly killed by your nobleman, and he'd been hiding in Croa for years. And of course, thanks to that, I saw a wonderful sight. Julia's eyes widened as she heard the story for the first time, even if she was a member of the aristocratic party. And then, as if he had made a mistake, Lohan covered his mouth, and as he thought of the end of Julia, he whispered secretly, reading Asher's countenance. Only my father and I know that when they die, the royals in Cr Julia would have a strange power to be manifested. You've heard of it. Julia opened her eyes wide. When he knew it was a secret, he seemed to have fun teasing Julia, and then he paused and said carefully, the power of Asher that Lyra kept insisting on. The ability to suddenly disappear. Most curiously, it really came down to the royal family. How could Asterope have come to Croa in his dying condition, who was just 10 years old? Julia said, stuttering at his secret confession, you're kidding me, right? Why would I be kidding now? I don't have enough time just to tell you the truth, who is going to die. By the way, I was so surprised that he suddenly appeared in the middle of the garden, and I knew that. In fact, the aristocratic party has done a great contribution in the manifestation of Asher's ability, which is manifested only in a few royals and which most do not know. Was that true? Was what Lyra said true? She was not insane. Or is Lohan crazy, too? Or is he just joking? Julia's mind was cast adrift. Her lips trembled, not knowing how to take his words. Think about it. Didn't Asterope do it all even though you guys tried to insult and demand so much? Besides, how do you think they could keep the empire and the royal power for so long? Do you think there were only 1 or 2 people who were blinded by power like you? Don't you think it's because when they're in a Cr Julia, their strange abilities are manifested? Lohan's words were credible. She had thought that the crown prince would not do it, and she had let him do a lot of work around the border areas to insult him. But the crown prince had done all the work in a mysterious way, even visiting there himself. It was impossible unless he had the ability to move the space. She remembered that they had said that there were 2 crown princes in fact. So, was it real? Lohan tried to explain to her in detail so that she could believe it, and she looked at him in astonishment. Lohan read the hope of telling her that he was lying, in her eyes, and he laughed at it and finished. Well, it doesn't matter to you what it is anymore. You guys will die, and Asterope will take care of you and become the emperor of the greatest power of all time, and in a while, Lady Selene will be the crown princess. He will remain at peace for a very long time with the nearest nation, leaving behind the great accomplishment of dealing with the evils that had dared to challenge the imperial authority. Lohan, who had left, turned away with a fresh face as if he was no longer frustrated, and Julia was left with a pitiful face, knowing the incredible truth. Her eyes fell to the ground. Julia had treated Selene as a thorn in her eyes, saying that she was vulgar because of her humble origin, but it was Selene who took all the light of the world, and the crown prince who she had said that she would make him regret would be honored. And all that remained with Julia, who had always thought of them as hers, was despair. She saw a guillotine in the middle of the square, and though there was still time before her sentence, she was already strangled by the guillotine in front of her. I'm going to sentence you because we're running out of time. As soon as Lohan was gone, one of the causes of the delay, the nobleman pretended to be in a hurry. A long piece of paper was in his hand, which seemed to be a document of the punishment of the sinners. The nobleman once scanned the paper and looked back on top of it, checking the contents, and slowly walked among the sinners. Where he arrived was beside Viscount Marryat, who was the first to sell out his colleagues through Vika's tricks. There was a certainty of faith in him, and the nobleman glanced at him who had been a little more stable than the others and sentenced him with a serious face. "I sentence the sinner Viscount Marryat to be decapitated. All of his properties will be confiscated, and his title will be deprived." It was a cold tone, not even with any feeling, as if it were obvious. The nobleman's voice that resonated in the square made him sink down as if he couldn't believe it. It was as if his face showed why he was being punished like this, and he felt like this was unfair because he had tried to reduce his sentence by informing on the others. From the beginning, beheading was decided to be his punishment, and the spectators began to murmur. Usually, it used to be sentenced a light sentence at first and the heavier they were after, and if it started with a beheading from the beginning, they would rarely get mercy in the future. The Viscount asked the nobleman with his own eyes that were shaking. "What about commutation?" "Commutation? I heard there's an imperial law that gives me remission if I inform on the others, but..." The sinner's eyes were drawn to the word "inform" of the Viscount because they had thought that all the sinners in this place could be saved through informing on the others. Why is he going to be beheaded even though he informed on the others? The nobleman, who received their gaze fixed with question and fear, replied, "Of course, you should be fully considered because you gave important information and testimony, but the crime you committed in the first place is treason, and it was too great to be reduced." It was a cold reaction not to even speak. At this, the Viscount swallowed his breath. "Yes? That means. If you can't prove that you're not a traitor, then you can't get the remission even if you do anything. You should think you will be done with a beheading, but if not, your whole body will be torn off and become food for the beasts." "Huh?" The Viscount's body collapsed to the ground, and he seemed distracted by the incredible reality. He thought he could avoid beheading, but how could this be? Something must have gone wrong. If it's Vika, he might have a solution because he had suggested that he should inform on the others at first. "Please call Viscount Vika." "Why Viscount Vika?" He was sure I would get remission." When he found Vika, squeezing his last remaining strength, the nobleman laughed and said, "Are you still looking for Vika? Do you think he really helped you? Was every sin proved enough by informing on each other, not to be able to get remission? Now you should recognize who would most benefit from the advice of Vika. Why are you being betrayed twice?" Chapter 225. No way. As soon as the aristocracy was finished, several sinners, including Viscount Marryat, fell to the ground. They had been hoping for a little but realized that it was a trap, not a hole to escape. Ugh. Viscount Marryat had a grotesque groan, realizing that Vika had deceived him again, and he did not ask about his sentence, as if he had lost all his will. The nobleman, who looked down at him with cold eyes, looked at the sinners who were in a panic and said, "Next." Since the first sentence was a beheading, the other noblemen waited for their turn while feeling nervous and trembling out of fear. And whenever their names were called, they would faint. The eyes and mouth of the nobleman were ruthless. He sentenced a beheading without mercy on anyone in succession, and he finally came to Lyra. Sinner, Vermont Lyra. Lyra, who had been called by her name, took Darian by the arm in surprise. Her trembling appearance was pitiful. Lyra turned to stare at Celine before she was sentenced. Like those who had been sentenced to death, she was afraid that she would be betrayed. "Since you are young and did not do any serious treason that would harm the Empire, I sentence you to 50 years in prison." 50 years in prison? It was lighter than beheading, but it was the same since she could not leave prison for life. After being imprisoned in a short period of time, Lyra realized that she would not last 50 years in there. It was difficult to spend some time in prison even when she was a noble. She would definitely not survive there as a commoner. She thought that not only her body would rot but also be mentally devastated, and she would go crazy. She would rather die. "You said you'd save me. You said you'd save me. Why do you let me spend 50 years in prison? You're trying to imitate a saint by just letting me live." Lyra was about to curse Celine, who had put her in hell, with resentment, but the aristocrat did not move and said again, "However, the petitioner's plea and the contents of the petition were very legitimate, and we shall make an exception. If she is willing to be monitored all the time, she can leave the prison. If she tries to escape, she will be executed immediately. What is that sound? Lyra, who could not understand except that she could get out of prison, stared at her brother Darian for an answer. Darian had been holding his hard expression, but now, there was a smile on his face. Brother, what does that mean? Celine must have helped you as promised, and if you were with her, you could get out of jail. It means you could live a life as you have been if you stick with Celine. Darian's eyes turned to Celine, and he expressed his utmost gratitude to her. Really? Is that what it really means? Did Celine really help me, unlike Vika who betrayed the others? Celine must have submitted the petition. Yes. Celine is the only one who can help that wicked bitch, as the Vermont family has been broken up and scattered. Oh, my God. She is so kind. But is it all right if Lady Celine does good for such a wicked bitch like this? Well, wouldn't Lady Celine make her a normal person? All the watchers were making fun of Lyra, guessing, and the sinners envied her. After confirming all of this situation, Lyra was barely convinced because of her incompetence and looked back at Celine, who had saved her life. Celine's face, smiling brightly as she was satisfied, was filled with pureness and with no malice. Why did I want to hurt such a good woman? Her eyes filled with tears of regret and joy, and it was very warm and transparent tears. It was like Celine's goodwill. Sinner, Vermont Darian. The next was Darian. He was close to Lyra's side, so it was enough to turn his head. He was there with Lyra, who had Celine's help, so Darian's face was not dark either. Rather, his face seemed bright. He might be thinking that he could be saved, too. It was plausible because his lawyer, Lyra, had been in and out of prison several times. You are going to be beheaded. What fell to him was a beheading. Darian's eyes were fixed, unbelieving. Why? My lawyer has destroyed the evidence with all his effort, so why? No way. Brother. Lyra, who was relieved since she avoided a beheading, took Darian by the arm in surprise, and his face turned pale as if he was about to faint. Why did you change your mind now? Karen asked Celine in a very low voice as she looked at Darian's pale face. Celine replied as if she was very happy. I think that with losing all her family, Lyra would be crazy, and I wouldn't be able to achieve what I want, and if Darian were alive, I might have used him somewhere. My God, how did I give birth to this scary child? I am cold-hearted, but I'm not as hard as you are. She glanced at Chloe, who was seated beside Lohan, admiring her, because Celine didn't look like her, and Chloe was the one left to resemble. Of all occasion, Chloe was looking at her, and he met her eye. Karen looked at him with a bad intention, but Chloe smiled as he was so happy, and she looked away while pouting her lips a bit. At the same time, the aristocrat had a sentence that was not yet finished. In fact, it is appropriate, but according to the documents submitted by the lawyer, there is a reason to reduce the sentence, so I sentence you to life imprisonment. You will be a servant of the imperial castle, considering that you have a sick, single father and a sister who would live the same prison sentence. The aristocrat, who had finished the sentence, turned away without hesitation. Although it was not a decapitation, Darian sank down on the ground with a devastating face because of the disastrous sentence he got even after hiring the best lawyer in the empire. And there was something strange about the sentence. A single father? Why did he address my father as single? Brother, I'm glad you are saved, Lyra, who did not know what Darian is thinking, tried to comfort him, looking relieved that her only brother was not dead. Darian, who had been comforted by Lyra, furrowed his forehead. He thought for a moment and asked her. Why did he call our father single? Yes. He said they had considered I had a sick single father. Did he say that? Lyra, who had forgotten the nobleman's words in the joy that Darian was alive, asked back, blinking. Darian looked back at Celine and Karen, where he was faced with a bright smile that greeted him. The smile that he could not understand made him confused. What is going on? I'm glad you're alive, anyway. Look, we're the only two who have survived here. Lyra raised her voice with joy, and it caught the sinner's fierce gaze. Naturally, those looks were not of joy because she had expressed that she was pleased to survive alone in front of people that were being sentenced to death. However, Lyra did not conceal her joy by facing all sorts of looks gallantly as if she had decided to trust Celine, who had saved her, and to abandon them, who had been praising her. How could she? I didn't know her bad temper at all. How could such a bitch survive and I? No matter how young she is. Oh, I really haven't helped much. The knights used force to keep the screaming sinners quiet. But to the sinners who were about to die, the knights were no longer fearful. Some sinners rushed to Lyra, saying that if they were to die, they would die with her. Yeah. Stop it. But their attempt was overpowered by the knights easily that the sinners with the broken arm and broken leg fell to the ground, and Lyra shivered in Darian's arms. It's a terrible sight. I doubt that they were the nobles of the Empire until not long ago. Asher watched this and clicked his tongue. Then, he leaped from his seat as if he could no longer watch this mess and came up to the sinners. I'm tired of watching you explain the same things to them because you're all going to give the same sentence. Asher looked really bored as he said so because the nobleman would continue to sentence a beheading. Asher held out his hand to the aristocrat who was sentencing. Chapter 226. I'll sentence. Yes? My father told me to finish quickly and report, so we have to hurry. The important thing is not to execute them but to support their manner. That was why the emperor didn't attend here. So I'll take care of it all at once. Eventually, the aristocrat, who knew the character of Asher, handed over the papers as if it were inevitable, and Asher, who received them, began to call the names that were not yet called. In this way, I sentence all 13 of you to be beheaded. There was silence in that uncompassionate tone, and the square was filled with only the cold air that came out of Asher's cold expression. Even Celine, who had seen his cold look in the past, was surprised by his cold voice. And the two are left, the former Duke and Princess Frederick. Unlike the other sinners, as the two were the main instigators of this rebellion, they seemed to be getting a separate sentence. Or maybe he had taken the papers from the nobleman, presuming he was feeling bored to give them the final sentence. I'm sorry for the Duke. Even though it had been a long time ago, your family has succeeded the royal blood, but you're done with the end of the only historic Duke family in the Empire. He said he felt sorry, but the Duke swallowed his saliva because his expression was cold. Sometimes a man has to cherish what he has, and then he gets something unexpected and precious. Asher said that and glanced over where Celine was as if she were a precious person he had unexpectedly acquired. Asher continued, now that I think about it, I should be grateful for the Duke, for you have been a good help in many ways since I was very young. The Duke's face was cold, and the winter was not over yet. The cold air was still in full bloom, but he got a cold sweat. Why did you do such a terrible thing if you are frightened like this? Asher ridiculed the Duke and continued to sentence him. For the Duke of Frederick, his sentence is beheading, and his body will be hanged at the entrance of the capital for a month. The Duke closed his eyes tight. Nevertheless, he was not surprised, so he seemed to be prepared. It was not desirable, but nothing was scarier than this, so he walked to the last sinner, Julia. Frederick Julia. Julia's body was trembling from time to time as she saw him for a long time. It was a different appearance when she had faced Lohan. It was full of malice. Asher said as if he was disappointed when he saw that she abandoned herself to despair and had a desperate face. You were frightening since you married a king of another country and sold the empire. What he said was true. How could you have thought of treason? No matter how much you hated me, even if you were the Duke's eldest daughter, you should defend the empire. If you weren't that bad, why did your brother betray your family? I am so sorry to see your despondent face. Asher pointed to the stands and whispered. As she followed his hand, Oscar, a pale man, was watching his father and his only sister nervously. For betraying his family, he looked as if he would fall out of worry. There was no shadow of a traitor on his face. There was only one face of his own brother, who was worried about his family and regretting. She had thought that if she met him, she would try to remind him of the terrible things he had done. Why make that face? Julia asked, what will happen to Oscar? Well, he'll live like a commoner, whom you hated so much. He's the one who put his family in hell, but you're pretty relieved. What else could I do? I would not live properly if I lived with his mercy. If I could go back to the past, Julia, who knew that it was a foolish delusion, waited for her last moments to come without any further ugly outburst. It was all over. She couldn't even scream because she was caught in a trap as he had intentionally driven her into the corner. The only good news was that Oscar survived. She had never thought about the welfare of her brother like a scarecrow, but when she saw his face, she thought it was good that he was alive. Asher smiled at this and said to himself in a low voice, so Julia would be the only one to hear it. You make a stupid decision to the end even if you succeed the very light but royal blood. And before she could even realize what that meant, he sentenced her. The sinner, Frederick Julia, is sentenced to beheading. The body, like the Duke, will be hanged on the walls of the capital for a month. As soon as Asher's sentence was over, the sentence was executed. The first one to be sentenced was the Viscount of Marryard, and his head was cut off. The sinners waiting for their turn for the only guillotine was either crying, peeing themselves or expressing their fears. Asher had prepared that on purpose. Death unfolding before them was enough to make them lose their minds, and the knights would break their limbs whenever they faint so that they would wake up. What's the last thing you want to say? Asher asked Julia, who watched the knights collect the head and body of the Duke who had been executed just before her. Although she submitted to her fate, it was hard to see her father's head separated from his body. She shook her head with her eyes closed tightly. Her arms and legs were like thin leaves, they already lost their function and could be shaken by strong winds. I hope you won't be reborn as a human being in your next life. Thud. The guillotine blade fell, and the head of Julia, who closed her eyes tightly, fell to the ground. It was such a lonely death for the evil woman who had shaken the empire in her hand and harassed the crown prince. As soon as the last sinner was executed, shouts came from the crowd. It was the condemnation for the greedy criminals who had dared to swallow the empire and the praise for the crown prince who had overpowered them all in advance without bloodshed. It ends so easily, said Celine, who had seen that Julia's head was cut off, in a rather hollow voice. Julia was a high-ranking noblewoman who Celine had never dared to see her face in the past, but her end was so futile. The high-ranking noblewoman, as high as the sky, was treated like a trivial thing, and she thought that her old self, whose head had been cut off by Darien, would have been nothing. She would be treated like trash. If the world was still there and was turning except for the wicked woman whose head had been beheaded. If it wasn't for the hourglass, if it hadn't been for the hourglass, she wouldn't have seen this precious sight. She had promised to get revenge, but it seemed to be too much easier than she had thought, and on the other hand, she felt strange. Even Lyra and Darien, who had looked so great in the past when she had nothing, were only seen in Celine's eyes as very shabby, humble sister and brother. Of course, it wasn't completely over because the highlights still remained, but it was different from the time when she had aimed at the right time and built up her force, being nervous. Now all that remained was to enjoy their slow and painful death. That's what I'm saying. Who knew that the great nobles of the empire would be like that? Karen agreed, watching the dead bodies being collected while frowning as it wasn't nice to see. But it was simply because of the terrible scene, not a pity for the sister and brother, who had not treated her as their mother even though she had been a fake. The frightened sister and brother were shaking with their pale face because of the dead bodies in front of them, but no one paid attention to them. Now that the entertainment is over, I think we should go to her mansion. As if he didn't care about the scene, Lohan leaped from his seat and said. It seemed like he wanted to take Celine to Croa as soon as possible after he revealed her identity. Yes. Chloe rose in agreement. It was more important for him to speak with his daughter and a woman he had longed for rather than with nobles of another country who he had no acquaintance with. Chapter 227. Since there was no reason to remain, there was a positive expression on Karen's face, too. Chloe, watching it, held out his hand to her, as if he were considering her to grab his hand and to get up. As it had not been a long time after her divorce, she did not grab his hand easily with hesitation. Somehow, she was wary of Celine. How can I object as he reaches out to my mother with a friendly face? When Celine got up and pretended not to know and to trim her dress, and then Karen stood up, taking Chloe's hand. Celine was about to leave the execution square, but Lyra, who was taken by the knight's strong hands and dragged to the prisoner's wagon, shouted in a hurry. Sister. Sister. You must take me, too. It was because Celine had not mentioned anything. Lyra needed Celine's help as she could go out of prison when she was accompanied by the petitioner who had submitted the petition. At the urgent voice, Celine slowly turned her head. She looked surprised as if she hadn't thought about it. Lyra. Sister, said Lyra, as if excited to hear her name, and she seemed to think that she could get away from this terrible hell. But unlike Lyra's expectations, Celine could not get her out. I'm sorry. I'm not the one who filed the petition. Yes? Lyra stiffened at that, and she looked asking what she meant. What if it wasn't Celine who submitted the petition? Whether it was unexpected for Karen, Lohan, and Asher, who was a little further away, all looked forward to Celine's next words. Of course, it was me who asked to write it, but I didn't have time to write it myself, so she sent the petition under her name because I didn't write it. So you'll have to ask her, not me. She? Who the hell is that? With the nervous look, Lyra asked, and Celine smiled softly and answered, I'll tell her to pick you up as soon as I get back, and don't worry. But Lyra's anxiety was aggravated when Celine said that she had to wait for a moment instead of giving the exact name. Who the hell is she? She was about to ask again, but Darian, who was next to her, asked something else earlier. I heard that my father was a widower. What the hell happened? He seemed to mind the strange explanation to the Count all along. They wouldn't use the word widower to a man with a wife. He asked Celine, but the answer was replaced by Karen. That's a foolish question, Darian. You know that your family lost the property as well as the title, because of you. If I hadn't divorced him, your whole family would have been the street tramps, instead of arranging a lawyer to you. Didn't you see other sinners die without a lawyer? Reflect on your behavior before you worry about the Count. He didn't know that it was the result of divorce, and Darian, who had been shocked and speechless for a while, asked again. Then, what happened to our father now? Are you only divorced in form, and are you with him? Darian asked so as if he wanted that, but Karen responded with a little displeasure as if she had heard some nonsense. How can a man and a woman who are not married live together? Then, where is he? Where is he? Don't worry because he's in a safe place. I've taken care of you who ignored me so much, and do you think that I threw him away? It was Celine who had cared about him, but Karen replied, emphasizing the favor to the Count. Darian shut his mouth when he had nothing to say, and Celine relieved him of his concern before leaving. You are now a servant of the Imperial Castle, so you can go out. Don't worry, you can check it yourself because he gets along well. He couldn't check it out now, but he nodded as if he thought that Celine, who had saved himself and Lyra, might not have left his father alone. Move. As Darian was talking to Celine, the knight couldn't intervene, but as he confirmed that the conversation was over, he pushed the back of Darian. Darian had to rejoice that he had been saved, but there were too many things to think of. Then, the brother and sister, who survived the execution, barely moved to the cold carriage again. Aren't you the petitioner? Yeah. I'm not. Karen asked Celine in the carriage back to the mansion. Then, who the hell is she? No, why did you do that? Karen had a puzzled face because she had thought Celine would carry Lyra by herself. Celine smiled pleasantly and replied, I'm just going to do the same thing. It was the worst and most resentful thing. The worst and the most resentful thing. Are you talking about the last thing? Do you meant that Lyra framed you? It seemed to mean the incident that Lyra had pushed the Count from the stairs. Anyone who would know the nature of Celine and the whole story of the incident would naturally think that she would take revenge. Celine gave an ambiguous answer that was neither positive nor negative. Well, maybe. Phew, do you make me so frustrating? You didn't even tell me everything. You'll soon find out, and don't worry. You didn't tell me what to do with Darian. Karen glanced at Celine whether she felt sorry, as Celine was doing many things alone without telling her anything. But to start the explanation, Celine had to start by saying that her head had been beheaded and she had turned back the time, and of course she couldn't explain it. Because of that, Celine just laughed and evaded the answer. Karen's eyes became bitter. You also have something to hide from me, and don't be too hard on me. Like right now. When she mentioned Chloe heading to the mansion in Lohan's carriage, Karen closed her mouth, realizing that she also had something to hide. They were able to reach the mansion shortly. Likewise, they had gone to the square. Naturally, the servants of the mansion, who thought that only Karen and Celine would return home, found out 2 more carriages decorated brilliantly, entering the mansion, and politely greeted them in astonishment. What a beautiful mansion this is. You have a very good eye. Asher purely admired, and Lohan agreed. Well, it's enough to meet the crown prince and the king. The servants are good too. The servants opened their eyes wide, pretended to be calm, and thought to themselves. I know the crown prince as I saw him a few times, but the king? But because they couldn't ask, and there was no one to give an answer, they hid their frustrations and served them sincerely. It was clear that Annie, the informant, would ask Celine and bring the answer. The attendants quickly served them the carefully prepared tea and fruits, and despite the fact that the visitors were the crown prince and the king, Karen was confident to guide them to the parlor. I'm so glad that you live well. So Karen, Celine, Asher, Lohan, and Chloe sat in the parlor, drinking tea, and Chloe first spoke to Karen. He was sincerely happy that she lived well. Karen replied with a cold face. Every time you meet me, you say that. I was really worried. There were so many unexpected things that I couldn't go. I didn't expect. There were not a few men who said the same thing as Mr. Chloe. In response to the guilty Chloe, Karen said as if she didn't expect it at all. But her shaking eyes proved that her answer was false. Of course, there were many men who had spoken the same words as Chloe, even if they had used both hands and feet, but there had been no man who had promised the future by expressing with his whole body that she was so adorable. She couldn't guarantee it because it had been so long and old, but she might have expected it a bit. Except for him, others had only enjoyed the situation. Let's stop the introduction, but get to the point quickly. They'd already talked through letters several times, and they acted as if they met again in a few years, and Lohan got angry. Mr. Lohan, why don't you go to another room? You don't have to be here. When Celine said that it would be better for Lohan to leave now, he was frustrated and replied with a very sad face. You don't know how much I've played a major role in this. Think about it, Lady Celine. Who brought Marquis Renard and his son, Chloe? Chapter 228. I see. Thank you. But you're not related to me by blood, so you don't have to be here. The same is true of Asher. No, Asher is my lover. Asher firmly grabbed a mug as Celine referred to him that he was her lover casually. The tips of his ears were also a little red. You can have a relationship with me as a lover, too. But soon Lohan started to talk nonsense, and Asher, who had a cold face, was annoyed and joined the conversation. I want to break my promise, and please shut up. Aren't you treating the promise of 2 countries recklessly? The great nation decides whether they would keep the promise. It was unfair but right, and Lohan shut up. Since a long time ago, the empire had the greatest power on the continent. When Lohan closed his mouth, the conversation which had stopped continued again. I'm sure you would guess since I've mentioned blood relations. This is your biological father, Renard Chloe. I see. Unlike Karen, who carefully introduced, Celine's answer was calm, as if it was not worthy to her. She had heard of the last name, Renard, somewhere, but it was nothing new because even if she had a biological father, her life would not change. Aren't you surprised? You have given me a lot of hints, and I can't be surprised. Besides, his face looks so similar to me, and what do you think it is? Karen had a pretty embarrassing look if she forgot that Celine had mentioned about the blood relation. It's not strange to have a biological father because I couldn't be born alone. By the way, why are you here? You didn't come until I was 17 years old. Why do you come now? Is money your purpose? Her exact wealth was not known, but the fact that Celine had accumulated considerable wealth had already spread throughout the continent. The businesses she invested in were originally successful ones, and they were far more successful than in the past, with the halo of Celine now. Especially for the items used by women, the rumors of whether Celine used them circulated in public and they were very popular. They thought that if they used the same item, you could be as beautiful as hers. Thus, Celine could not greet the presence of her biological father who appeared after she had gained such wealth and honor. Now that she had done everything anyway, there was nothing her biological father could do for her. Rather, she felt that he would have more to gain from her. Of course, if Karen liked him, she was thinking about cheering for a reunion. As she had looked at him for a moment but from a distance, she felt that Chloe loved Karen pretty much. That was how Celine felt about her biological father, Chloe, who suddenly appeared. That's all my virtues, Lady Celine. Lohan replied confidently to Celine's question. He behaved that he should be praised with glory to reunite a long-separated family. Why? I persuaded Chloe and his father, Marquis Renard, who did not believe in your existence. My existence? Yes. Chloe was looking for a long-awaited lover, but he didn't know your existence. If so, didn't you come to me because of my famous name? Celine, who once thought of his tender gaze that had turned to Karen, finally relaxed. If her mother liked him, she would have agreed for her mother to remarry and minimize the relationship with him, but it didn't seem necessary. You must have been surprised, after hearing that you suddenly got a 17-year-old daughter. Celine stared at Chloe and was about to ask like that, but she was surprised. Since when did you look at me like that? He had the same gaze which had Lovely looked at her mother. It was an expression that the Count hadn't given to Lyra and Darien. It was a very sweet and tender father's face, which Celine did not comprehend. So it was hard for her to stick to the wall-like attitude at the friendly face of her biological father as if she were treating others. Celine tried to make a casual look. To be honest, at first, I visited the Empire to find Karen rather than Lady Celine. She is a woman I've been looking for a long time. My father told me that he found her and I rushed to come without hesitation. I had little interest in the existence of a daughter. Chloe pondered Celine's title for a while and read the countenance of Celine, then he called her a lady. He was still careful because he didn't know what she was thinking. But when I meet you like this, I feel so strange. No, maybe I'm impressed. And it also brings a lot of regret and disappointment for myself. Regret and disappointment? I haven't seen Lady Celine's childhood as you're nearly an adult, and why I didn't find you a little earlier. I assure that Celine was a shining child compared to any other children. Right. Well, she is so beautiful that she must have been outstanding from birth. Of course. She resembles someone. The color of her hair and eyes look like Karen. Her features look like Chloe. The two of you look like a father and a daughter, even if anyone sees. I'm happy then. Celine lost word in the dialogue between Karen and Chloe. No, she wasn't able to say anything exactly. She had heard the words that she was beautiful or shining, so many times, but it was the first time from her parents. Celine's face grew redder and redder. Even her ears got red, too. Clearly knowing that it was clear, she couldn't conceal it, because she had to leave the room to hide it. Lady Celine. Asher, who sat down next to her, took the hands of Celine. He should be happy if she would find her family, but this was not what he wanted. If Celine liked Chloe like this, there was a possibility that she could follow her father to Croa. He had been really busy, but he hadn't talked about it in order to avoid this situation. What if he came and shook Celine's heart? Not surprisingly, Lohan watched this and drew out what Asher feared. Are you not interested in Croa? Croa? Yes. It's my country and Chloe's. You were born in the Empire, but you are a child of the noble of Croa. Isn't it natural that you should stay in Croa? I'm sure your mother is going to marry Chloe again. Karen had never said such a word, but no one denied Lohan's words. No, rather, Celine also wanted Karen to marry the man who truly loved her. She'd only been through him for a very short time, but Chloe was a good fit. It was because he had deeply cared for Karen at each of his eyes and actions. In the past, Celine had thought that her mother was very wise, because she had chosen money and status, but she was a little different now. Celine realized that she could not be happy with that alone. This was the result of Celine's experience of returning the hourglass back to the past. Well, I appreciate your suggestion, but I can't leave here. Celine dragged Asher's hand and put it on her leg. That alone was enough. This was especially true for Chloe, who had long missed Karen. Is it only 1 year anyway? I think it's a good idea to stay in Croa until you're an adult. After that, even though you want to live together, you can't. Lohan did not give up and continued to persuade Celine, with words that seemed there would be no chance if it wasn't now. And Celine smiled softly, and said, if he marries my mother as you say, I will visit any time. I'm not a child, so I don't have to live with them. At her answer, Asher's expression lightened. Then he stepped into the conversation as if he had gained confidence. Right. You can visit them by trip and vacation? It's not so far away, so if you want to see them, you can take a trip once a month. Use me. I can save 1 day for you. Asher added, and Celine laughed a little. You love me so much, and how can I say that I will go to Croa? I don't feel like having to live together. And I don't decide whether to remarry or not. At the final words of Karen, Lohan looked devastated. Then he hurriedly looked at Chloe and urged him to do something, with his face. I respect Karen's opinion. How stuffy you are. Eventually, Lohan became angry and left the parlor, but no one stopped him. Chapter 229. Rather, thanks to the disappearance of the interrupter, they could talk even more freely. While drinking tea for a while, Chloe explained why he had been kicked out of the Imperial Castle, why he couldn't have picked up Karen, and why he had later tried to find Karen but hadn't found her. He included that he had missed her so far. Karen wiped her tears in the pathetic story, and Celine's heart moved. If you'd been faced with such a big thing, you wouldn't have been able to stay sane. I would have had aphasia. I understand. Thank you for your understanding. I tried to find Karen late, but I couldn't find her because there were so many similar names. Besides, it's a little bit, my condition wasn't good either. I may be like that, if you go to Croa. As she said he understood Chloe, Asher intervened in the conversation with a serious tone. She had no intention of going, but he kept on begging not to go. She wanted to make fun of him. It's true. You will absolutely miss me. Lady Celine. But Celine was satisfied with Asher's frowned face, and turned the subject, as he told her not to say such a joke. Mother, what are you going to do now? I'm big now and I will respect whatever you do. Me? I'm not sure. Even if we have a child, it's strange to get married. Karen glanced at Chloe as she spoke. It seemed that he should catch the sign of her intention, and that he should try his best effort to get her heart. Chloe, who had come to the Empire in search of Karen, replied that it was natural. I will try to get your heart. I will come to the Empire over and over again. Getting a mansion near you is the first step. Chloe answered Celine sincerely, and Karen was drinking tea quietly, but in his very enthusiastic aspect, her cheeks got red and asked what she had been curious about, as some of their conversations were sorted out. Well, did you say that you'd help Lyra when you get back to the mansion and that you'd send someone? Then, I'm sending someone. Who is the woman who is going to take Lyra with? I did. You'll soon find out because she will bring Lyra. Well, it's not bad to be a little late. She will be more desperate than that. Wouldn't that be more fun? Celine replied, imagining Lyra, who was crying uglily. It must be a masterpiece that I want to leave as a picture. If I saw it myself, it would be great, but unfortunately, there was someone else to see it. They sat down in the parlor and talked about Chloe being her biological father, and arranging the family register would be good after Karen's decision, and after that, Lohan returned to the lobby and they finished the conversation in no time. Why do you finish the conversation when I come? Lohan asked with a displeased face. It wasn't because of you. We were trying to end the conversation, but you didn't come back, and we've waited for you to come back. Chloe replied casually. It was a bright face that he was no longer upset. Chloe. You stayed in the room crying because you couldn't find Karen, but now you talk quite a bit. Lohan was annoyed, but they did not continue the conversation which had already ended. After that, Asher left the mansion and Chloe, who suggested a date to Karen for a walk, stayed in the mansion and waited for her to be dressed. Lohan, who had not gained much harvest, left with all kinds of irritation to go back to Croa first, and Celine, who was going up to her room, ordered a passing servant to call her maid to send to Lyra. Where is Annie? Please tell her to come up to my room because I have something to say. At the instruction of Celine, the servant bowed to her and disappeared to call Annie. Without waiting too long, Annie quickly came to Celine's room. There was a lot of curiosity on her face, wondering the conversation they had just had in the parlor, and the identity of the unidentified guests. Miss, did you call me? Annie squeezed the curiosity into her heart and asked Celine, pretending to be casual. She seemed to think that Celine would tell her when the time came anyway. It was obviously seen, and Celine smiled softly and gestured her to sit on the other side. Sit down. Yes, Mississippi. At Celine's hand gesture, she ran and sat down at the other side, and Annie's face was very excited. Instead of having her do something, she told her to sit on the other side as if she was talking about something. And Annie's prediction was such a hit. I have something to tell you. It's very important. Annie shined her eyes and opened her ears. It meant that she was ready to hear anything, without missing any words. Celine continued to say, you need to go to jail. Yeah? Jail? But it was not a funny and interesting story, but she was surprised and misinterpreted that Celine would put her in jail, like Lyra and Darian, and asked back. You don't have to be surprised that much. I'm not saying you will be put in jail, but I'm asking you to bring Lyra. Then Annie swept away from her heart as if she was relieved and asked why she would visit. Why am I going? Weren't you her guardian? No, you are the guardian of Lyra. You filed the petition, although I called the contents. That's what you told me to do. I just did what you told me. As Annie said, she had only written as Celine had told her. But it was definitely Annie who had submitted it, and the person who would be Lyra's guardian was the one who had filed the petition, so Annie was legally the guardian, though Celine had ordered her to do that. So you don't like it? Yeah. I mean, do you hate bringing Lyra? Celine's question darkened Annie's face a little. Annie didn't say she didn't like it, but it seemed to be very disgusting. She was foolish indeed. It was a rare opportunity Celine had prepared, and it meant that Lyra, who had no status as a commoner, would belong to her own right. Then they said Lyra couldn't be apart from her guardian, and she would be executed immediately upon departure. Yeah. So she may die if she goes afar from you. I mean, Lyra shouldn't be apart from you. No matter what happens. Annie's expression became mysterious. It was a face that seemed to grasp something in Celine's useless explanation, but she was not certain. And Celine continued, besides, she has fallen to the common people for the price of rebellion, and she is in the same status like you. It's different from the past when she did nothing pretending to be a noble, but a commoner isn't like that. A commoner works and gets paid for each day. Lyra was now a commoner and could not be separated from Annie by anything. And Lyra, who was no longer aristocrat, couldn't live simply by staying. She was not a noble who led an elegant life with the estates she received from the country, but she should work hard every day like the common people. Annie's eyes glistened as she understood this. Though she understood Celine's words, she was looking for a little more confirmation. Besides, is it time for you to think of marriage with Baron Burbum? If that happens, you'll become the Baroness, so you're better off getting used to having a maid. As you know, I had a hard time at first. So Annie, who confirmed the hidden meaning of having Lyra like a maid, jumped out of her seat with a smile. She wanted to get Lyra out of jail right now and make her do all the hard work. But in order to do that, she needed the permission of Celine who had called her. Annie waited for her answer, feeling nervous as if urging her. Go and take her. Thank you. Miss. I'll get back soon. Annie went out of the way and soon knocked on the door again. She couldn't have been there already, so Celine answered with a mysterious voice, and Annie carefully asked Celine with a reddish face. Miss. I'm sorry, but can I dress up a bit? I think I am dressed so simple. Annie seemed to be very firmly prepared to master Lyra. It will also hurt Lyra. How would you react if Annie, a maid, appeared beautifully in front of you? Chapter 230. It was a good reaction, so Celine nodded and gave her one more gift. Take a colorful wagon. I don't mind the carriage used by me and my mother. Are you sure? Of course. Did you see me say something empty? Oh, my God, miss. I never imagined I would ride such a precious carriage. Thank you so much. Even if she was impressed, her eyes were full of tears, so Celine rebuked her to go quickly. Yes. I'll be ready and get back soon. Annie's hands moved quickly, and soon afterward, she was able to go to pick up Lyra with a gorgeous appearance that was no short of anything, as if she were a noble. When returned to prison, Lyra rapidly lost her weight for a very short time. As soon as Cain was brought to prison, he was taken to the imperial castle, and all who had been imprisoned were executed and she was alone. Waiting alone for someone to take her out of the dark and cold prison was difficult even if it wasn't Lyra. Celine said she would send a person right away, but I haven't heard any news from her for 3 hours. She was worried that no one would come. She was afraid that she might have to live 50 years in this old, dirty, uncomfortable prison. Celine might leave her here. Lyra crouched roundly. Because it was hard to overcome the cold, worry, and fear. As soon as her face was buried in the arms on her crouched knees, she waited for her only sister to send her a person as promised without betraying her. Lyra, who had endured such a long cry, believed that a person would come, and waited for the unknown. Suddenly, the tough footsteps gradually came to Lyra, and shortly afterward, the footsteps stopped before her prison. Come out. Lyra looked up her head in a flash, as she heard a voice. It was one of the guards who guarded the prison. The guard who furrowed her forehead glanced over Lyra's shabby and miserable appearance, and said once again, opening the door with a key. Come out. Me. Then, who else is here? Did Celine send anyone? If it weren't, he couldn't tell her to come out. Is there anything better than this? The joy was as big as the wait was long. It was not easy to stand up because she had been crouching for a long time, but he seemed to leave himself if she was a little late, and she gave her feet full of power and got out of the terrible prison. Who is here? Lyra, who couldn't stand the curiosity while walking down the hall, asked the guard. Her steps were painful and bitter, but it was buried in joy and she didn't care. At Lyra's question, the guard answered as if he was disagreeably surprised. Lady Lyra. No, you are not a lady anymore, but a sinner, Lyra. Do you think you are still in a position you dare to ask that question yet? His tone was pretty harsh and rough. The guard showed great disgust at Lyra who had joined the rebellion. She had been feeling that since she had become a sinner, but her whole body trembled with disgust toward herself. The physique of the guard also played a part. Go quietly. You have no right to say. Lyra closed her mouth at the guard's murderous warning. This was because it was a scary figure that seemed to wield violence if she said something more. Anyway, a little further away, she was able to get out of this damn prison and from the terrible guard. If she would just stick to the side of Celine, she would never have to come back here. So hopefully, Lyra headed to the lobby behind the guard but hardened without any reaction to the unexpected figure she met there. In the lobby, an unexpected figure was waiting for Lyra. You waited a long time. Would you take her right away? Yeah. I'll do that. Annie's face was so beautiful that the guard blushed a little. The smile she had learned from the side of Celine as she had spent with her, helped her to emit a charm that surpassed her appearance. Why is Annie here? No, is that even Annie? The poor maid became so beautiful like that? Lyra, who watched her for a while, looked down and confirmed his miserable appearance. Her skin and hair were messed with the black dust, and her feet and legs were swollen and worse than the commoner women. Her face would be messy without having to check. Maybe it might have a scar. As soon as her thoughts reached that point, she felt ashamed and humiliated, and she would die right away. It would be okay if the person were Celine, who she couldn't beat by beauty, but she was worse than Annie, who had a freckled face. So she couldn't lift her head and hid her terrible face. Annie called Lyra's name. Lady Lyra. Oh, not anymore, because you're a commoner. Is it right, Lyra? Annie omitted the honorific title and simply called her name. Lyra's body was shocked by not only her appearance but also her tone of speech as Annie imitated Celine, but she didn't lift her head, so Annie called her again. Lyra, did you break your neck? Why don't you raise your head? Lyra squeezed her fists and shook her fists, as Annie asked, though she knew why she could not lift her head. She wanted to get angry, but it was anger for herself that she couldn't. Annie said, mocking her again, Mila, why don't you lift your head? I have to check your face so that we can go out together. I can't take the dirty girl without confirming her face. The words that followed were enough to make Lyra more miserable. It would be miserable for Annie not to be dressed up in splendor, but it smashed Lyra's pride because it came out of her beautifully decorated mouth. What shall I do? Nevertheless, Lyra didn't raise her head, so Annie asked the guard for help. The guard sighed at Lyra's pathetic behavior, and he forcibly grabbed her head to look up. Yah! It was so sudden that Lyra screamed, and Annie opened her eyes wide, covering her mouth with a fan in her hand. It was not because of his harsh acts against Lyra, but because of Lyra's ugly and miserable appearance. Oh, my God, I wonder if this is really Lyra. She is Lyra. It's hard to confirm her because she's been imprisoned and couldn't wash, but she is Vermont Lyra. It's hard to believe. Lady Lyra was always beautiful and elegant. As soon as she was degraded her status, she became so shabby like this. Nobody is going to call her a lady now. Lyra's eyes turned red with continued insults. She could bear to be humiliated because she had really sinned, but it was hard to bear the thorny words of Annie, who had been her maid. Stop, stop. So when Lyra squeezed out her wet voice, Annie was surprised and asked the guard, Did I do anything wrong? I don't know why Lyra is crying. The guard shook his head and comforted Annie, no. Since she entered the jail, she was a little crazy. She was laughing alone. In the meantime, the state seemed to have gotten worse. So please don't be bothered. I see. She was once the most elegant aristocratic lady in the empire. I admired her the most, but now I can't find any traces of it anymore, and I'm so sorry that she is out of her mind. The two approached the incredible conclusion, staring at Lyra very pitifully. The sympathetic eyes ripped Lyra's pride without leaving any trace. The procedure is complete with your signature. In the future, you can easily leave or take her at any time with a simple procedure. Lyra's two fists were squeezed in the look of the guard, who explained as if she were taking her luggage. However, the reason she couldn't say anything was that it was insulting, but the guard's explanation was appropriate, and she was also too scared of him. She was also afraid that she would be put back in prison. It was still painful as he had grabbed her head like a beast's. Now the Count or Darien could not help her as in the past. She had to deal with all kinds of hostility alone, but she was not confident. That was why she couldn't resist at all, nor got angry. Chapter 231. It was too much pain for a young girl who had run with only the hope of delusion. So, if she waited as if she were dead, she could get out of this prison only with a bad feeling, so she shut up and waited for the conversation to end. I have to go back quickly and meet my elder sister, Celine. I couldn't help it now, but if Celine knew this wrong treatment, she wouldn't let it pass. She must be sad, and she would bitterly scold Annie. While saying she was a presumptuous maid, Celine might kick Annie out of the mansion. Now Celine and I are both commoners, but in the past, we were both nobles and were attended by Annie. Celine had saved Lyra and her brother, Darien, who had committed treason, and she would punish Annie and take her side again. It was clear because Celine was her only elder sister. "Let's go, Lyra." After the conversation with the guard, Annie started to walk elegantly with her back straightened up as if she were a noblewoman. She was following Celine's example but in a much shallower movement. Her anger and fear disappeared and a laugh came out. Celine was not that much. No, in retrospect, Celine was elegant enough to admire. Who dare would be so elegant and would catch her? No one could find fault with her elegance. Even though they were both commoners, Annie was far different and Lyra furrowed her forehead. "If I just go back, I will tell Celine all about it, and let the stupid maid who imitates the aristocrat taste reality." Pledging again, Lyra quietly followed Annie. Fortunately, Annie's footsteps were a bit slow to imitate the noble steps, so there was no need to suffer when she walked. As she walked away from the terrible prison, a gorgeous wagon she could not even dare to make was waiting for Lyra. Naturally, Lyra, surprised by seeing Annie get on the carriage, opened her eyes wide and asked, "Annie, did you ride this when you came here?" "Well, what else did I ride?" She didn't care about Annie, who replied as if she disregarded her. The carriage was gorgeous and shocking. What a gorgeous carriage it was. There had been no such carriage in the carriages of the Vermont family. No, to be exact, she had not thought of decorating it that much. Why did Celine give Annie such a carriage? At best, she was a maid. Obviously, it was too much for a maid to ride. No, most aristocrats couldn't afford such a carriage. It was not a carriage for a maid. But why? Why did Celine give it to Annie? "Miss Celine is waiting for us, so we have to go back quickly, but I feel a little bit uncomfortable riding with you." At Annie's words, Lyra felt some unknown displeasure and had a lot on her mind. At that moment, Annie spoke suddenly to Lyra as she was about to climb into the wagon. Annie furrowed her forehead and looked at her with a face that seemed to not like something. "It's a little bit displeasing to get on the same carriage with you." "Lyra, you should sit next to the driver," Annie said something ridiculous. With this, Lyra was surprised and asked, "What do you mean? Why should I sit next to the driver? Didn't you come to pick me up?" "You'll have to lower your head and check your appearance, Lyra. What if you dirty this fancy carriage? This is a carriage provided by Miss Celine, and is it all right if you get it dirty?" Annie pointed to Lyra's dress, which was like a rag. She seemed to be displeased, even pointing at her with her finger. Lyra had already checked her dirty, miserable appearance, so even if she didn't lower her head, she could guess her condition and her face became red. It was no different from a beggar on the street, but she didn't want to sit next to the driver, so she made an excuse. "Someone can clean up the carriage later." "Who? You? You don't mean to let a servant do it, do you? There's no servant left to do such work for you anymore. Of course, it's the same if you sit in the driver's seat. Wipe out the dirt from your body by yourself. All the commoners do that. I'll excuse you first because you smell terrible." Annie, who said those words, left Lyra and got into the carriage alone. It meant that Annie would not permit Lyra to get in the carriage, no matter what she said. "How dare you say it without going crazy?" As she could not let it go any longer, Lyra, who was about to open the door of the carriage and go wild, suddenly stopped. She was afraid that Annie might want to put her back in jail here. Without Annie, she could not get out of jail. She had to go to Celine for now, whatever she did. If she went back and informed Celine and accused Annie of her arrogance, she could not help but solve this ridiculous thing. Would you like to ride next to me?" The driver carefully asked Lyra, who was struggling to calm herself down. He had also worked in the Count's mansion and came to Karen's mansion, and so he remembered her character so well when she had been a noblewoman. She was not a girl to be treated like this. As a result, he couldn't talk down to her like Annie. He took off his hat, which he had been wearing, and responded in a polite manner. "I would." Lyra responded with a deep sigh. She seemed to soften her anger a little by his polite treatment. Very kindly, he made a place for Lyra, laying his old handkerchief himself, and since she had no choice, she sat on it. Perhaps because Lyra sat by, the wagon started to run very slowly and smoothly because the wagon was quite uncomfortable as compared to the inside of the wagon, surrounded by soft cushions. It was even more so for the unfamiliar Lyra to sit. That was why he continued to watch Lyra's complexion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "So please drive the wagon a little, no, very fast." Lyra, however, did not care about that. To return to Karen's mansion, she had to go through the square, and on the way through the square, a large crowd looked at her with hostility. "You bitch. Ugh. Lady Celine has taken you out of prison. You tried to sell our country, and you are the worst and the most wicked woman in history. Chut chut. Look at that, and who thinks you were a noble in the past? It's so ugly. Why are you alive?" Lyra lowered her head, closing her eyes because of the unbearable insults. No matter how shabby she was now, she could not hide her original features and hair. In addition, it was also known that the dazzling and colorful carriage was Celine's. So the people's eyes gathered by themselves, and they did not hesitate to blame and swear at Lyra, so it was more uncomfortable to slow down the wagon to get a little easier, but it was better to speed up and avoid it. "Ah. All right. You might fall, so hold on tight." The driver seemed to have noticed that, and only then did he sped up the wagon and quickly exited the square. Therefore, their swears were buried in the noisy sounds of the wheels and hooves of the carriage, and she no longer heard the people's insulting words. "This is my sister's new house." "Exactly, it is Mrs. Karen's residence." "Karen. I heard it was the real name of the Countess." "She is no longer the Countess, and we now call her Mrs. Karen." "Ah." Lyra's eyes shook upon seeing the beautiful mansion that was getting closer. She did not hear the voice of the driver, explaining that Mrs. Karen had brought all the servants from the Count's mansion. It was simply unbelievable that the frivolous whore lived with so much wealth. Apparently, all the Count's property must have been taken, and where had she collected it? Oh my gosh. It's Lady Lyra. No, she is not a lady anymore. It is Mrs. Karen who has hired us. That's right. But it's been over 15 years since I've called her miss, and it's weird to suddenly talk down to her. Right. Though she became a commoner, it's a bit strange to talk down to her all of a sudden. But look at her appearance. How can that be? It's more comparable because she's next to Annie. She committed treason, and it's natural even if she gets like that. Shoo. She's looking at us. Turn your eyes. Chapter 232. Each of the servants who watched Lyra descend from the carriage that arrived at the mansion spoke a word, and Lyra looked angrily at them. You guys have a foul mouth. Is it because your master has changed from an aristocrat to a commoner? How did you endure in the meantime? Then, she said a harsh word, and Annie, who got out of the carriage late, replied with a smile. Oh my God, do you think you can scold them? Why are you getting angry when they're telling the truth? Although I was downgraded to a commoner, how could you insult me openly? The surprised servants began to whisper to each other, and Lyra, who had come to Celine, was about to be angry with Annie. How dare you talk like that even though you're just a maid? Annie, you did a good job. Lyra, are you here? Celine came out of the mansion as if she had waited. She smiled brightly and greeted Lyra, and Annie reported to Celine with an innocent look as if she hadn't done such a thing. Miss. They said I can leave and take her at any time in the future. Really? That's great. Annie flattered Celine as if she was shaking her tail if she had it, and Celine stroked her head, saying that she did a good job as if to praise her behavior. Is that how she got her favor? It was indeed disgusting, but Lyra was about to act like her, so she swallowed her saliva. She cleaned up her messy hair and approached Celine. Sister. Lyra, you look sick, are you okay? I'm fine. In the sweet voice of Celine, she felt a sense of injustice before she even said what had happened. How could you be so generous? It was quite different from the image that she had thought of the daughter of a vulgar prostitute in the past. Indeed, Celine was a beautiful woman with a very elegant, loving and warm character. She was an angel who reached out her hand to the ones who were harmed. Celine can certainly deal a hard blow to Annie who uses bad words and actions. Annie became my protector, so I had to change her by scolding and fixing her stupid and foolish behavior. Lyra rubbed her glowing eyes once and talked to Celine. I have something to tell you. To me? Yes. You must listen. It's about a bad kid who doesn't know who she is and runs wild. I'm worried that she will be troublesome to you. At those words, Celine raised her eyebrows and was surprised. Is there a child like that? I didn't know at all. It seems to be a very important issue, so I must listen to you. Lyra then nodded in agreement as she was greatly disturbed. Miss, don't you think Lyra should wash her body first? I think she should change her clothes, too. I can't let her talk to you like this. She seems to be smelly too. Annie didn't know that the protagonist of the conversation was her and once again insulted Lyra. Lyra expected that if it was Celine, who was like a fox, she would read her intention and scold Annie, but Celine unexpectedly agreed with Annie's suggestion as she felt Lyra was pitiful. Annie, you are her guardian. She may get sick because of the dust, so help her. You are a good woman, aren't you? Yes, Mississippi. Do not worry. Trust me and rest assured that I'll take care of Lyra. You're very busy. You are not the person who will care about this little thing. Thank you, Annie. Lyra, I'm glad Annie will help you. See you later. Then she left, leaving only a soft smile. Lyra was ashamed of her hand, which was going to say wait a while since it was colorless. Why? It was clear that Annie's tone was insulting and sarcastic. Did Annie ever mention if she was worried about me? As she was speechless, Annie with a triumphant face approached Lyra. Well, Lyra. You have to take a bath. All of them are looking at you, frowning. As Annie said, all the servants were watching her. The eyes of curiosity, pity, and ridicule gathered in one place. Celine's permission had fallen, and there was no hesitation in their eyes. Hey guys, tell Lyra where the bathroom of the maids is. We can't dare let her use the bathrooms our masters use. Okay, Annie. Okay. That suits her. A few laughter burst out from some of the maids running out as if they were waiting. They were the maids who were attached to Celine. How do I do that? Though she was pushed into the bathroom by rough hands, Lyra, who should have a bath alone for the first time since she was born, stood in front of a huge bath basin with a small bucket and expressed embarrassing words. She didn't know what to do. She thought about how it would be like to wash herself with the water in that big basin and put her hand into it. The cold water temperature that was like ice was creepy. Oh my. It's so cold. Startled, Lyra hurriedly pulled her hand out and wrapped it. Though winter had passed and it was already early spring, it was not a temperature one should bathe in without heating the bath first. Do all the maids take a bath using this cold water? Do commoners always do this? How can they take a bath with this cold water and don't get sick? If I wash my body with this water, I think I'll catch a cold and fall down right away. It was clear that it was obviously not. No, she was sure. And even if the common people bathed in cold water, she did not want to do it herself. Even if she understood she should wash herself, she could not take a bath with such cold water. I think it's okay to warm it up a bit, and why should I take a cold bath? When she threw the basin as she thought it was nonsense and opened the door to get out of the bathroom, the maids were waiting at the door. Somehow the dissatisfied expressions of the maids seemed to be due to Lyra, who had left the bathroom without even bathing properly. Miss, why did you just come out? Oh, no, why did you get out, Lyra? A maid, who was still unfamiliar to talking down to Lyra, asked, correcting her words. She was quite awkward with her arms folded. It was because she had to flatter Lyra in the past. Nevertheless, the maid's eyes were as cold as Annie's. Lyra replied with an angry face. How can I take a bath with that cold water? Cold? It's normal water. Lyra's resistance did not work at all, and the other maid answered in a natural way. Normal? That may be true for you guys, but not for me. I can't take a bath with that cold water, so bring me hot water. What? Do you think you can warm up the water and wash yourself like a lady? Now figure out who you are and your position. The face of the maid was colder than the water Lyra had to bathe in. Lyra lost her words and bit her lips. Why are they harsh to me? At one time they had been her maids who had praised her as the most beautiful and elegant lady. As the maids of the richest family in the empire, they had been always proud of themselves and never lost their pride, but why are they now stupid and stuck to the common people? I was trying to talk to you because you were the maids of the family of Count Vermont, but I was a fool. I should tell my sister. Lyra sighed as if it was not worth it to have a conversation with them. It seemed that she was getting this kind of treatment since she was now just a commoner, but she was not from a lowly background to be treated like this unlike them. I am the daughter of the mansion's owner and the younger sister of Celine in the first place. If I talked to Celine, this would all be over. Celine would be very sad if she knew about this. It was funny that she, who was born as a noble, had a haggling with the maids with these trivial problems. In addition, Lyra had no energy to argue with them now. Rather than wasting her time in such a trivial thing, she wanted to quickly wash her body, eat a nutritious meal, and lie down in a cozy bed to sleep. Because of that, she tried to get out of the bathroom and go to Celine, but one of the maids grabbed her shoulder and prevented her from doing so. Chapter 233. What? Where are you going? You were ordered to take a bath. Didn't I tell you? I'll go to my elder sister. Are you going to miss Celine with that dirty, miserable appearance? Are you sure? The maid blatantly looked over Lyra and asked. Lyra's face was reddened by her dirty and ugly appearance. You are shameless. You don't even know it gets dirty every time you walk. Even the stable keeper won't be as messy as you. Miss Celine is busy, but you are rude to interrupt her. Lyra, accustomed to the elegant narration of the aristocracy, trembled with shame at the maid's one-sided insults. You do not know who you are. It was the maids, not herself, who had to know their own self. So she was going to be angry but realized that she was not in a position to confront these vulgar maids and cleared her face. That's not a matter for you to care. Besides, I've been so annoyed that you have talked down to me even if I was downgraded to a commoner. I was your master, and I am even the younger sister of Celine. You'll definitely be punished if my sister knows of this. She shouted as if she was above the maids, and the maids hardened like ice water in the bathroom for a while. Lyra calmed herself as if she thought she had given a fatal blow at them and regained her lofty look, which did not suit her appearance. But she was mistaken. The maids looked at each other and soon laughed as if it was ridiculous. Did you hear that? Oh my God, she must be crazy. Did she say she is Mrs. Karen's daughter and the younger sister of Miss Celine? She is just talking about the story of the past. You're still saying that with that dirty, miserable appearance. Excuse me, Lyra, have you forgotten that Mrs. Karen has divorced the former count? Then, as if waiting, the mockery followed, and it meant that the Count and Mrs. Karen had divorced, and she had no relationship with them now. Before Lyra retorted, the maid spoke again. You believe the rumor in public, don't you? Rumor? Lyra asked, being agitated without her recognition at the evil face. The rumor that Mrs. Karen temporarily divorced the former Count to protect his property. It wasn't absolutely true. Mrs. Karen is still young, beautiful and rich, so why would she marry the sick old Count again? There's nothing left for the former Count. Another maid agreed with those words, which were perfectly reasonable. He's sick, and he has children who committed the heavy sin of treason. One of them is right in front of us. She is an evil being who can be called the source of all this, said a maid, pointing her finger at Lyra. No one could deny it. All the Count could have boasted of was property and title, and now that he had lost all and even his health, who else would stay with him? And it was Lyra who had made him lost everything. Her stupid behavior had led the family of Count Vermont to be torn apart, and the former Count also lost his health. This wouldn't have been the case if the former Count hadn't been pushed down the stairs. If Lyra hadn't pushed the Count down the stairs, the situation would not have gone this far. When the maids agreed, Lyra's complexion was pale because the source of all this was really her. What she knew for herself and what she heard from someone were quite different. The latter was much more shocking to her. That. When they asked for the responsibility she had intentionally turned away from, she stammered. What else can I say? They didn't have to hear her excuses because it had clearly come to light. So it was about the time when the maids, who had taken the side of Celine and was hostile against Lyra, began to mock again. What are you doing? Annie, who had been gone for a moment, appeared and asked. She looked at the maids that gathered and frowned at Lyra, who was still unwashed and dirty. What are you doing here? What about your bath? Well, she used to be so clean before, but now she may not. We don't know what she wants, as she complained about the water. The maids pretended not to know, and Annie, who had made the ridiculous situation by giving a word in advance, clapped her hands and said, I suppose she doesn't know how to wash herself after she's become a commoner, so why don't you help her? What? Do you mean to attend me? The maids, who didn't understand Annie's intention because they didn't hear her since she was far away, looked at Annie. Lyra, not knowing what she was doing, looked at her, too. What are you doing? Miss Celine is waiting. Annie, laughing, took Lyra's arm and dragged her to the bathroom. Wait. Lyra shouted. She was surprised, but it was after Annie had already held a small basin in her hand. Wait. Annie. You. With that water. She had not said what she was going to do. Annie, who pretended not to see Lyra's embarrassment, immediately poured the cold water over Lyra's head without hesitation. Yah! Lyra, surprised by the sudden cold water baptism, sat down and screamed. It was the same with the maids, and they swallowed their breath out of surprise. Cold water in this cold weather. In fact, no matter how common a person was, it was common to use warm water on such a cold day. Moreover, there was more firewood than needed in the mansion, so they could heat the bath water at any time. If it was not hot, it would be better to postpone the bath because it was easier to get sick when they bathed using cold water. So the maids, who expected Lyra to take a bath slowly, watched the situation with their mouths covered in surprise when Annie had put the cold water on Lyra's head. It was also a difficult situation to interfere. What are you doing, guys? Help Lyra, who can't even bathe alone. Annie was pushing Lyra hard as if she was a real villain, and the maids hesitated because of what Annie was doing. They were quite reluctant to do something bad against someone, apart from what Lyra had committed the sin and become a commoner. It was not even comparable to hurt her a little bit with words. What are you doing? Annie asked again, but the maids still lingered and were not active. Annie, who sighed loudly that the bathroom sounded, filled the small basin again and urged the maids. Miss Celine is waiting. But how could they ignore the name Celine? They had also heard that Celine asked them to take care of Lyra, so they came to Lyra, who had sunk down, reading Annie's complexion. I thought it would be a lot sooner for a lot of people to do than wash her alone. Annie said, smiling broadly, and Lyra, who was shaking because of shock and the cold water baptism, shouted, Stop it. I'll do it. So please, she no longer said she would go to Celine. No, she seemed to have decided she would wash herself because she realized that she could not go without the harassment of the maids. Annie put down the basin in her hand for Lyra's wise choice, and the maids, who almost baptized her with the cold water, had a sigh of relief. All right, I hope you will not bother us any further, Lyra. You have to get dressed up and visit Miss Celine. Besides, Mr. Darien. No, he should only be called Darien now. Miss Celine called Darien, so please clean yourself up. At the words that Celine had called Darien, Lyra's hand, which was trembling, grabbed the basin. Annie saw Lyra rubbing her body with her other hand, and she was soon satisfied, and the maids who had squinted at Lyra followed Annie out of the bathroom. Unlike Lyra's expectation that she would see Celine after taking a bath, she could not easily meet her because she was busy. Well, Darien is coming to see Miss Celine tonight, and she said that she would meet the two of you at the same time. She has a lot of work to do. If it was Lyra who was still young and small, it was fine to talk down to her, but it was still awkward to call Darien without his title. Annie paused for a moment and then went on. Chapter 234. Lyra, who confirmed the words again which she had heard as she had been bathing, was surprised and covered her mouth. My brother Darian too. There is no reason to call you alone. I think she'll have dinner with you too. She ordered 2 more meals. That's ridiculous. Annie had a feigned smile as if it was ridiculous, and yet Lyra was relieved that Celine was for her and Darian. Celine's mother was divorced on paper, but they were still a family, and Lyra didn't like the simple uniform and room that could be seen as a commoner's, but she was satisfied with this arrangement. Of course, she did not intend to remain still and keep living as a commoner even if it was so. She was going to ask for a change in something she didn't like. Anyway, Miss Celine has a lot of work to do, so enjoy your time. You may not have spare time anymore. What is she doing? Lyra asked a question as Annie tried to turn around because she suddenly wondered. Celine had always been busy doing something without having anything. As a result, she had invested in promising young businessmen, enlarged wealth and power, and made all the servants of the mansion be on her side. Lyra had thought of Celine as a trivial thing, and that everything she had been busy with was no good, but she didn't think like that anymore. So Lyra asked, and Annie looked genuinely surprised and asked, although you were in jail, don't you know that? Lyra had been told that she was the most intelligent of the noble ladies until recently, but she knew nothing as Annie said, so she had no other words to say. What Lyra had known was nothing more than manners. So when there was no answer, Annie, who put her hand on her waist, began to talk as if she were proud of herself. Miss Celine is in touch with the people who will fill the post on behalf of the nobles who committed treason, and with the imperial castle. There are a lot of vacant lands and government jobs. Why does my sister do that? She asked as it was an unexpected answer, and Annie answered as if it were natural. The nobles she invested in will be there. They will not be granted the estate because they have no special accomplishments, but they will be given similar power because they have to manage it. She'll be filling the labor shortage of the imperial castle with capable men from the academy, and she will let them learn the lack of skills in the academy. In many ways, they need the help of Our Lady. No, the empire will be ruined without her now. Annie said with exaggeration, but to some extent it was true. Because a lot of nobles of the empire had been executed. All of those who filled the vacancy were lower nobles who had a relationship with Celine. The most competent of the commoners were to be put into filling the vacancy where the aristocratic party had been kicked out. It was already publicly spread, and there was no need to hide it. Some had already been appointed formally. It was easy to do so because Celine's side was also on the side of the crown prince, and it was also easy to take strong power, similar to the previous aristocratic party trying to neutralize the imperial power by concentrating their forces on the power institution. So, is my sister doing it in the middle? Celine was doing something more than she thought, and she could not hide her surprise, and Annie, excited by this, boasted of Celine, pretending to know the details. There are many others and so many that you dare not imagine. So she has taken the crown prince's heart, unlike you, who was abandoned by your fiancé. Despite the difference between the heavens and the earth, between the origin and the learning. Well, anyway, you have to thank her for your rest and wait quietly because it's not too long before you're so comfortable. She left Lyra's room, leaving a meaningful word for whether this was all she had to say or whether there was nothing more to be scornful about. Is my sister the center of power like Miss Julia in the past? She is a commoner, and the daughter of a prostitute. However, Miss Julia doesn't even exist in this world anymore. Unable to realize Annie's mocking, Lyra was shocked by the new information about Celine and spoke to herself, keeping her eyes in the air for a long time. Dinner was late. They didn't know what the main reason was. Thanks to that, Darian, who had been taken to the mansion for dinner, had to have the eyes of servants in the front hall for a very long time. There were a lot of things about Darian that would interest them. But what really caught their attention was Darian wearing the uniform of a page boy. As he was older, he was not a page boy, but now he just entered the imperial castle, so he had no choice. It was because all the servants entering the imperial castle were selected at a young age. There were a few that went there after adulthood, so there was no dress for him. Oh, my God. Is that really Mr. Darien? I feel like I saw something I should not see. The one, who they had served as their master, appeared in a dress of a page boy, not a commoner's dress, so they could not believe what they were seeing and was speechless. Nevertheless, the reason why they could not move their eyes off of him was that it was quite funny and strange that an adult was dressed in a page boy uniform. If he wasn't really a crazy person, a grown man wouldn't wear a child's clothes, and no matter how the uniform fitted him, the shape and the pattern were the page boy's. Darien knew it, too, so he tried to pretend not to know, but eventually, he warned them to stop staring at him as if he didn't overcome his shame. What are you looking at? But it wouldn't work. No, some of them had really moved their eyes off as it was shortly after their master had changed, but most of them looked at Darien with wide-opened eyes. It was because there was a man behind him like a watcher and because they thought he might overpower him, in case. The role of the watcher was that. The servants now seemed to be in touch with the fact that Darien and Lyra had rebelled and that the prestigious family of Count Vermont had been ruined. However, Celine had not come down for long, and their mockery and curiosity continued for Darien, and it was not until late at night that Celine came down from her room to the first floor. "Oh, my God. When did you come, brother? I didn't know I was busy." She approached Darien with a soft step, pretending not to know it even though Jessica reported it to her several times. "You must have a hard time coming here. I think we should eat quickly. Unfortunately, my mother is out, so we should eat first. Jessica, can you get me Lyra?" The expression of Darien, who was ashamed, was loosened by her soft tone. "You saved me from the execution, who had participated in the rebellion, and made a way for me to live in the future, so how can I not be happy? Let's go to the dining room, brother." Celine's soft smile lightened his steps to the dining room as if he were a nobleman in the past. Shortly after Celine and Darien arrived at the dining room, Lyra appeared. As Celine saw her panting, Lyra seemed to have waited a long time for this. "Brother. Sister." Lyra raised her voice with a flushed face, and all the attention of the servants was focused on her. Although there was no aristocrat in this place, it was a frivolous behavior. She had been a beautiful noblewoman in the past, but she was so excited that she could not care about it. She hugged her brother Darien once, who glanced over her with his surprised eyes and turned around to Celine. "My elder sister, I wanted to see you." "Is that so?" "I'm sorry, I'm so busy." "Just sit down. Let's have dinner." She had a lot to say, but suddenly, she could not talk about it, so she nodded and sat down after finding her place. "It's already too late, but we'll talk about it while we eat," said Celine, putting the salad in her mouth. Chapter 235. She seemed to be busy and hurried, but it was so elegant and natural that it was enough to impress the viewers. How can Our Lady be so elegant? Most of all, I want to thank you for saving us. It was Darien who noticed Celine's busy meal and spoke first, and he thanked her for her hard work. It wasn't a big deal. When she answered that it was not a big deal, Darien's face darkened, because he realized that she has become so much of a being. "Thank you for what you have done for our father. I heard all the explanations, and now that I know all about it, and my position is more than I deserve." Lyra, who did not know the circumstances, turned to Darien as if she were asking for an answer, and she was surprised at her situation and did not think of the Count, because she thought Celine had given him any help. "You are welcome. It's not me, but you who is going to carry the burden. But it was all thanks to Mother and you." But instead of answering, the ongoing thank you sign went on, and Lyra eventually asked why. "What is our father doing now? Is he in the mansion?" She was the one who had put the Count in a terrible situation, so it was strange to ask herself, but Darien explained it kindly. "Our father is in a medical facility, because even the mansion of Count Vermont was reverted to the Empire, and he has no place to go." "I see, but it's fortunate." Now Lyra knew the situation of the Count, and had a relief as if she thought it was really fortunate. She had thought he had been abandoned after divorce, but now found out that he was okay. But there was something she still didn't know, so Celine told her, "Well, my mother and I have nothing but to move him, but you have to pay for all the costs and future costs." "Well, I heard that the Imperial Castle would pay, so I would handle it anyway. Besides, Lyra will soon become an adult. So it would cost a lot of money, but he seemed to pay it back with Lyra, for the rest of his life, until the Count was dead. Brother, what are you talking about now? You're not saying you're going to pay it back with me, are you? When Lyra, who had never imagined that she would do work for her lifetime, asked again with a pale face, but when no answer came, she stood up and raised her voice. Why doesn't your mother marry my father again? The words chilled the atmosphere in the dining room. It was because there were several maids who had seen Mrs. Karen go out with a man who had looked like Celine. They had looked quite friendly and sweet. There was such a man next to her, who was so young and handsome and friendly, and who would remarry the former Count who could hardly move. Besides, he looked so much like Celine that no one could think but her biological father. Darian didn't even know Chloe's identity, but he didn't say any more whether he was convinced and understood that she no longer had any reason to look for the former Count. What do you mean, brother? I can't stay away from Annie. Work? Then Lyra shouted again, and Annie dared to intervene in the conversation. I'm sorry, miss, but can I say something? If it had been in the past, Celine would have scolded how she dared to intervene as a maid, but now they were all of the same status and Annie was also involved in this conversation, so no one could criticize her. Yes, Annie. I'm getting ready to leave the mansion too, so why don't you take Lyra as a maid instead of me? Anyway, she's in a position to stay with me and make money. When Celine's permission was given, Annie quickly unraveled what she had prepared. It was also the beginning of the final movement, in which only Celine knew the end. She had waited long for a chance, and it was her goal. Celine smiled brightly and praised Annie for speaking out what she had ordered to say as if it was her idea. That's a good idea. It's a good idea that even the former Count, Darian, and Mila can all be happy in the future. And it must have been Celine who would be the happiest. Well, because everyone put a silent pressure on her to become a maid of the mansion, she stammered. How can I say I will do such a vulgar and uncivilized work? It was totally unacceptable. But she couldn't say that because her father, who had been pushed down the stairs and crippled, was taken hostage. You can't stay away from me anyway, so you don't have a choice, do you? Besides, those who don't work in this mansion can't eat. Look at Miss Celine. She's working till late at night. Except for Mrs. Karen, the owner of the mansion, all the servants, as well as Celine, were working. Like the nobility, nothing was created for free because there was no land granted by the country. In addition, no matter how hard she tried to deny, she had no choice but to work as a maid. Now, Lyra was neither a noble nor a daughter of the noble, just a child and a sinner who was responsible for her sick father without holding anything in her hand. She had to work even if she didn't have to stay next to Annie. Since there was no one else to support her education, she had to work with gratitude for the years she had spent. She had to repay the former Count for raising her so beautifully and gracefully. Well, it's so, how can I complain anymore? There was no room for denial because no one else was responsible for her. Lyra, don't worry. I'll pay you enough. How can I treat you so badly? Sister. As Lyra tried to deny it right away because her salary was not an issue, Celine took a sip of the drink and added, you will have a social experience for the future and get used to it a little bit, for your poor father, who can't move because he's sick. For your father who you had made like that. Celine's eyes were thinning out when she made Lyra recognize the heavy price for her sin again. Whenever you feel uncomfortable, let me know. I should do that for you. Celine, who had said so, wiped her mouth with a napkin and got up from her seat. I didn't eat much, but I was about to finish. I still have work to do, so I'll have to finish my meal. Brother, Lyra. I hope you enjoy your meal slowly. I'm not your family now on paper, but I think of you like a family, so just relax and go. Lyra reached out to Celine as if she still had something to say, but Celine, who no longer had any reason to be here, quickly turned and left the dining room. And there was silence in the dining room for a while, where Vermont's brother and sister were left, and a moment later, it was Darian who broke the stillness. Lyra, by the look of your face, I know how much you have a grievance, but thank her for her goodwill and humbly accept it. Brother? Lyra stared at Darian with an incredulous look. Why does Darian even ask me to be a maid? We made our father like that, so we should take care of him. It's time to face reality. We don't have any other options anyway. Exactly, Lyra had done it, but he could no longer hurt his sister and swallowed his words. What on earth have you heard from the Imperial Castle, and in a short time, you have changed so much? Lyra glanced over her brother in disbelief, but felt that he no longer had the will to talk about the topic. So, she tried to say something but dropped her head. Miss, will Lyra really listen to you without any resistance? Annie, who secretly brought a simple dinner to Celine who had returned to her room, asked her very privately. Celine replied as if it was natural. If she says she can't do it, I'll have her do it. You're doing great, so do as I tell you. Chapter 236. I get it, Mississippi. By the way, what are you going to do to make her a maid? I don't think it's very useful, and I'm also wondering why you should make such an arrogant kid as a maid. Don't tell me I have to take her out, right? Annie said that because Lyra had to stay next to her. Celine replied with an unexpected smile to the worried Annie. Don't worry. That's not going to happen. To be exact, it was highly likely that everything would be sorted out before Annie would marry and leave the mansion. Annie cocked her head at Celine's vague answer, but she nodded, thinking she might have a deep thought. Well, as you said, I'll be hard on her starting tomorrow. I'm actually having a little fun. I think this is why the nobles are harassing the maids. Celine lightly smiled as Annie looked as if she would do what she didn't ask her to do. She also wondered if Annie, who chose to bully others for fun rather than for a reason, was even worse off. The proclamation to afflict Mila was not empty talk, and from the next day, Annie harassed Lyra with great severity. No, everything Lyra did as a maid was a pain for her, even if Annie didn't do anything. Lyra had to wake up early in the morning, eat breakfast in a hurry, and clean the mansion, but be scolded several times by Annie. Of course, she protested her strongly at first, but she was forced to reduce her malice with the secret weapon Annie had prepared. Lyra, are you stupid or do you want to die? If you want to go back to prison, keep rebelling that way. Do you really like that prison? No matter how much the weather is getting warmer, the prison would be cold without a thin blanket. It looks like you can't even eat right there. You. It was not even her sick father who had made her surrender, but the prison that had made her suffer, not even her brother, who had turned to give up less than a day later. This was because Lyra spent more of her feelings worrying about her own safety than understanding and sympathizing with the pain that others suffered. You? I told you to call me Miss Annie. There's a class among maids. Besides, I'm not like the average maid. I am a maid who can stand next to Lady Celine. You didn't forget that the maids put Mrs. on Alicia when they called her, right? So please watch your mouth, unless you want to be put back in jail. To Annie, who turned around again referring to the prison, Lyra could not rebel at all. Instead, she sneaked into Celine's room to escape the public eye. She believed that Celine would rebuke that presumptuous Annie. She tried to meet Celine several times, but she couldn't. Besides, when she barely met her, she was smiling merrily with Annie next to her. What's the matter, Lyra? Sister. I've come to accuse Annie, but why is Annie next to Celine? It was quite natural for her to be Celine's maid, but for Lyra, who had barely met Celine, felt as if the sky had collapsed. Sorry. An important letter has arrived. Can you wait for a moment? Yes? Yes. Lyra, who was so obedient, stood still at the door, waiting only for the end of Celine's business. Not surprisingly, she was not asked to sit down, and Annie, who was talking to Celine, sometimes glared at her, so she couldn't even say she'd sit down. Is this a formal invitation? Yes, it was originally planned for winter, but now it's going on. Now that the Empire doesn't have the Duke family, the Marquis of Vincent and Corinne are the highest nobility, so all the nobles will gather, right? It's very likely. What about His Highness the Crown Prince? Asked Annie, her eyes shining. She asked if Celine would attend with a whim to the place where all the nobles of the Empire would gather. Then Celine took out another letter that had been placed under Corinne's invitation. His Highness said he would attend in person. Oh, my God, then this will be your first party together with His Highness. They had met at Corinne's engagement ceremony, but it was the first time she officially accompanied him to the party. They might get more attention than Corinne, the main character of the wedding. Still, Corinne must have been pleased, not caring. Then the time is running out, so you'll have to prepare your dress right away. Should I call in a designer? Something fancy would be better, right? Celine shook her head and lifted the letter so that Annie could see it better. Read it. Annie quickly began to read the letter before her eyes. Would you like to come with me to Marquis Vincent's wedding? It's a good opportunity in a long time, and I'll send you a dress and shoes if you allow me to do. Oh, my God. Does it mean His Highness is sending you the dress himself? Yes, so don't prepare anything. Annie grasped her hands with an ecstatic face as she finished reading the letter. It seemed that she had already imagined Celine and Asher that would show off their beauty at Corinne's wedding. It wasn't her own business, but Annie reacted with great joy, and Celine smiled briefly and asked Annie if Annie had been so cute. What about you? Yes? Are you not attending with Baron Bourbon? I think he also received an invitation. Then Annie opened her eyes in a circle and said to Celine in surprise. I got it, but I thought I should go with you. If you follow me, I'm sure Mr. Asher will get angry. So when Celine asked her to go with Baron Bourbon, a big smile came to Annie's face. Can I really do that? Yes. You say it like I never let you go. Thank you so much. Miss. I'm not the one to prepare for the dress, but you're the one to do it. In fact, Baron Bourbon said he would send someone. Did you hide it after hearing it? Celine looked a little dumbfounded. Annie scratched her on the cheek and avoided Celine's eyes. It's tomorrow, and I haven't given him a definite answer yet. May I go out? Tomorrow? If I tell you not to go out, I'd be a bitch. Go out and come back safe. Yes, miss. Annie gasped out of the room, and only then Celine beckoned Lyra, who was standing by the door. Did you come here because you wanted to say something? You must be having a hard time with your work. Your face has become quite emaciated. Then, Lyra slowly approached Celine with her mouth shut and a dark look on her face. I came here to complain, but how can I say that to Celine, who had just talked about the sweet time ahead? As she thought of herself, she was so humble. She was in the same position as Celine until recently. No, she was much nobler and more graceful than Celine was. But what about now? She was in a position to clean up the floor that was passed by others, being abused by the maids. I'm sure Celine doesn't care as much about those trivial things. Celine, who noticed the will of Lyra, who didn't open her mouth easily, spoke in a soft tone, handing over the tea that had been poured for Annie's share. If you have a hardship, let me know, Lyra. It was like a friendly word that noticed Lyra's heart. Lyra slowly opened her mouth and carefully accused Annie of what she had done. It's hard for Annie to be so mean to me, sister. My God, I see. Oh, poor girl. When Celine didn't listen to Annie, stood on her side, and didn't hide her sad face, Lyra, who gained confidence, confessed what Annie had been harassing her. She even spilled water on the hallway I had already cleaned up. And sometimes she kicked the water that I had brought, and she dusted the windowsill. Even she threatened me that she would send me to prison if I hurt her feelings a little bit. How could she have done such a wicked thing? Celine clasped Lyra's trembling hand, admiring the traces of Annie, who had indeed harassed her enough. Not only that, but other maids. I was told that they were being naughty to a newcomer, but I didn't even know they would do this. Sister. I must have been too idle. Don't worry, I'll give them a harsh scolding because you're my sister. Chapter 237. Lyra burst out into tears when Celine brought up what she had been waiting for. It was not thanks to Celine. It was simply because of the joy of punishing maids who didn't know who they were now. Celine, who gave Lyra a handkerchief, said in a bright voice, Lyra, why don't you go to Lady Corinne's wedding for a change of mood? Me? Because she had no acquaintance with Corinne, Lyra asked back with tears hanging on her eyes. Celine smiled brightly and affirmed, yes. If you are alone in the mansion, you will feel depressed. That's true, but the wedding between the Marquis of Vincent and Corinne. There must be a lot of people who were on the side of Celine and the Crown Prince, but how can I go there? I might be insulted to the point of no comparison with the bullying at the mansion. Moreover, my status has been lowered and I have to participate as a maid, so why are you suggesting such a proposal? Celine read Lyra's complexion that she didn't like it, and said again, stroking her hand. And besides, you can't continue living with this misunderstanding, so I think it's necessary for you to meet people again. Misunderstanding? Now you don't have a bad idea anymore. You were too young to judge. Everyone makes mistakes when they're young. Of course, Lyra of the past hadn't changed since she became an adult and had become more vicious, taking the life of Celine, but Celine smiled softly but did not mention such a useless explanation, for her cause. Misunderstanding. Who would have covered it up as her childishness, though she could have ruined the empire? Lyra still stuck to her anxious look. Why don't you stay near me if you're that nervous? You'll just have to make an acquaintance with them a little bit. But the persuasion of Celine continued to the point that it would not end if Lyra did not give her consent. Why don't you wait in the carriage, in case? You can go back first, if you don't want to. There's a constraint on being next to Annie, but if I say it well, they'll overlook it. So how can I not nod? Lyra slowly nodded when Celine said, you can go back first if you don't want to. Then Celine smiled on her face with great joy. You made a very good choice, Lyra. I'll tell Annie well, so don't worry. And that smile of Celine was enough to give Lyra credibility. Whether Celine had really given Annie a hard scolding, Annie's behavior harassing Lyra suddenly stopped. No other maids openly bullied her either. It was because Annie was the main driver of the harassment in the first place, and because Annie stopped harassing Lyra, they didn't have to harass her first and do anything evil. Lyra, do you see these dusts? Are you really reporting that you cleaned them all? Of course, Annie didn't pass Lyra's mistake, but she just stopped finding fault with something for no reason. Sometimes a significant smile followed, but it was much better than when she had been harassed. Rather, Lyra regained the confidence she had lost, feeling that Celine was taking more care of herself than just a maid, Annie. Now that I have sinned, I can do nothing, but if I would go back to the same place as the original in a little while, I will never let go of Annie and other maids. It was sometimes included in Celine's advice to Lyra. Of course, like herself of the past, Celine sent her maid to melt her frozen heart. Are you all right? Why don't you take a break? This is from Lady Celine. She said she is worried and you need a little rest. It wasn't because of the sweet snacks Jessica brought, as Lyra's eyes had tears. It was because of Jessica, who had been with Celine's side for the longest time, brought it. Jessica looked pitifully at Lyra, who was really suffering. Although she had been harassing and sinning against Celine, it was very miserable to see her fall so far, as she was not yet an adult. Although Lyra didn't like the sympathetic look of the maid, she realized that Jessica had a good relationship with Annie, and soon lowered the tip of her eyebrows and bit her lower lip to make her face look pitiful. Jessica, thank you. You've always been very friendly. In the past, I used to order you as a noblewoman, but now my status is low, and you are the only one that looks after me, even if everyone hates me. Although it was not simply because of her lowered status, but because of her past actions, Lyra criticized the maids who harassed her, to win Jessica's heart full of compassion for herself. The confusion was to make it so. It's not because your status has been lowered, but they're good people anyway, so it'll be better soon. So Jessica, sensing a bit strange in Lyra's answer, corrected it. Yes, Jessica. You're right. They're all good people. However, they find fault with anything without reason. They just take advantage of being on their own ground over a newcomer. When she was told that they find fault with anything, Jessica recalled Annie's face in an instant. Jessica, who had seen Annie harassing Lyra, also thought she was a little too much. The other servants of the mansion were so easily swept away, and they would change their attitude if the mood changed, but Annie was a little different. She harassed Lyra as if she were planning to. Of course, considering what Lyra had been doing behind their backs so far, Jessica thought it was deserved, but when Lyra made a pitiful look before her eyes, her heart shook. It was Jessica who had been against Celine in the past, unlike others. Of course, the wicked Celine had thrown her away, but she had not given up on her will until the end. That was why Celine chose Jessica as the one to deliver refreshments. Don't worry. The lady is taking care of you, so you'll be well soon. If it's hard to tell the lady, you can tell me. As Celine wished, Jessica sympathized with Lyra and gained her trust little by little. Sometimes Jessica brought snacks Celine wanted to deliver, and took the initiative to listen to her troubles. Does Annie hate me? She is kind to other people. Of course, Lyra had intentions that were slightly different from those of pure Jessica. She tried to undermine the relationship of Jessica and Annie, by disparaging Annie in secret. I'm sure she won't do it anymore when you get used to it. Annie is a good girl. But that shallow trick didn't work for Jessica, and to make matters worse, it seemed like the little ruse of Lyra was being carried over quietly because Annie no longer had any fault with her. My God. You look better in your clothes. Really? Yes. You're always so beautiful, but I'm speechless when you are in such a well-decorated dress. At this point, I'm worried that Miss Corinne will be uncomfortable. Celine, wearing the dress that Asher had sent, could only be described as a real beauty itself. The embroidery, placed in gold on a soft pink dress, was shaped like a tulip symbolizing the empire, and the star-storied jewels at the base of the dress glistened softly as if each boasted its value. It was not a taste of Celine, so there were no cumbersome decorations, ribbons, or frills attached, but it was not too much to say that she was more beautiful than anyone else just with their rich-looking skirts and unexcessive jewels. Corinne's not such a petty person, so she won't mind. I also don't want to ruin Corinne's wedding, so I'm just going to say hi and stay quiet. Of course, being quiet does not mean that their eyes will not gather, but those with sense will turn their eyes. Corinne is not such a woman who will care about such trifles, so I don't have to worry about it. Annie, you look great too. Celine said to Annie, who was combing her hair. Annie also dressed up in the dress sent by Baron Bourbon. Although her beauty was not close to Celine, she was a noticeable figure among the maids. Perhaps Annie was proud of herself, but she raised her chin to the fullest extent and laughed as she covered her mouth. Thank you, Mississippi. It's all thanks to you. It's not thanks to me. You made it yourself. I'm shy. Unlike her shy red face, her eyes were full of confidence. It was not a cover for humility, so it was passed on to other maids. Chapter 238. Until just a year ago, she had been a cheerful girl who had been covered in freckles, but now she was far from the past as a real baroness. Of course, there were the maids who were envious, and they also added commitment to their loyalty to Celine in order to live a better life like Annie. It was to be picked up. But Celine no longer intended to take care of the thin-eared maids who had helped Lyra in the past and laughed off the insidious behavior of the maids who did not know that. Lyra, who was watching this from the corner without saying a word, sighed and turned her eyes out of the window. In the past, Celine's place had been for her, but now it was not, so she had a burning feeling. Now no one gave Lyra that look. No, rather, they treated her as an invisible human being who was nowhere to be found. They had used to flatter in front of her that Celine was vulgar. In the eyes of Lyra, a splendid carriage entered the mansion, which must be the crown prince's that had tried to somehow show off his presence with Celine from the past. The carriage of His Highness has arrived. Other maids also raised their voices with their eyes wide open as they were leaving the window open. As a result, the touch of the last decoration had quickened, and Celine was able to get ready and leave the room before he got off the wagon. Have you come? I thought you were coming down from the sky. Celine laughed a little in his response that seemed sincere and not as an exaggeration. Unlike the pretentious smile she just made, it was a sincere one. Oh, my God, look at the clothes worn by His Highness the Crown Prince. A maid, who was watching the scene from afar, spoke in a very low voice to another maid next to her. Did he arrange them as a set? It's just like a set. I think so. The embroidery on the collar is the same. So did he send it as a gift to Our Lady? Oh, my God, with those splendid appearances, guests will get confused about who's getting married. As the maid said, the clothes of Asher had the same embroidery as Celine. Whether Celine also noticed it, she passed Asher's hand, which politely reached out, and touched his collar. A beautiful embroidered gold thread without any misalignment was touched by Celine's fingertips. As she liked it, and made a gentle smile, Asher's smile deepened, too. Shall we go? When asked again with his hand out, Celine nodded and held him gently this time. When he was about to escort her straight to the carriage and leave the mansion, Celine stopped, as if there was something she had forgotten. Wait a minute. Do you have anything you've forgotten? No, it's not an item, but it's a person. Celine's eyes headed toward Lyra, who was located a little distance away. Then, as if waiting, Lyra, who came forward, bowed her head in front of Asher. I've decided to go with Lyra. It's for a change from my mood. As a natural result, Asher's face, which had just been filled with joy and satisfaction, stiffened. His face showed why this criminal interrupted his time with her. It was not only Asher that thought so, but the servants around them also took a sigh and cursed Lyra, who was trying to intervene between Celine and Asher. No matter how much Celine had recommended, she should have rejected it with keen notice. How dare you intervene between us even if we meet in a long time? At Asher's cold blue eyes, Lyra shrunk. It was only then that she regretted that she would attend the wedding. Celine, who had expected this from the beginning, called out Asher's name as if she did not know. Mr. Asher? Do you really have to ride with her in the same wagon? I wanted to go alone with you. So far, only 2 people had moved, and the maids had used a separate carriage or they had not taken any maid at all. Asher appealed her with his eyes. Celine, who was speechless with surprise because she didn't create the situation to see him like this, suddenly came to her senses and brought up what she had prepared to do when she heard him calling her name. Lady Celine? I must have been a little careless. I've never done that before. I'm sorry, Lyra, but would you like to take Annie's wagon? I've ordered them to give Annie the most spectacular carriage in the mansion, so it shouldn't be uncomfortable. Besides, you had to move with Annie anyway. Celine was sure that the Baron Bourbon would come to pick up Annie, but Celine smiled and said, pretending not to know it. The sudden load made Annie's face look gray, but only her lips clenched and muzzled. How can I complain about her giving the most splendid carriage in the mansion? Even if she did not give such a carriage, she could not vent any complaints on Asher's face as if he were very satisfied. It was Lyra, not Celine and Asher, where Annie's irritation headed, who would ruin her date in a long time, was directed. Then Annie, please take care of Lyra well. Celine, who smiled as if she didn't know Annie's irritation as Annie was surprised and couldn't speak, got into the carriage with Asher. Annie and Lyra, both of them looked stunned by the shock. Asher, who thought strangely of Celine who glanced out the window with a significant smile, asked her if anything good had happened. Yes, I've only had good things lately. I think it'll continue to be like that in the future. I think something fun will happen soon, said Celine. And Asher smiled and laughed as he was flushed by her words. Is it related to me? Then he asked with a certain look of expectation. He expected that when it came to Celine's future, he would naturally be included. Asher would be in the joy of her future, but he had nothing to do with this work at all, so when Celine refused to give an answer, a question came to his face. What makes you so happy? It has nothing to do with you, but I think my long-awaited work will finally come to an end. If it's something you've been looking forward to. As he knew all about Celine's situation, he omitted his words. For some reason, he thought it might have something to do with keeping Lyra alive. Celine continued, it is as you guess. It's revenge for the woman who put me to death. The last thing I've ever wished for is coming. I see. May I ask what you're going to do? There's nothing special. I'm just giving it back the way Lyra did to me. Just like she did to me, I'm going to return it back to her. Celine's words reminded Asher of the past she had confessed to and what misfortune Lyra had inflicted on Celine. In the past, Celine, who had been horribly killed, was only at the end of death to see that the nature of Lyra and the whole situation that cost her own life had been set up by Lyra. It was the past when she had crawled into a trap without even knowing she was going to destroy herself. As soon as he realized that such was what Celine had prepared and expected, he held her hand gently with some regret. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "No, I just want you not to hate me like this." Although she had lost her life by Lyra, she was still alive at this moment. However, it didn't mean that what she had experienced was gone, but she could have mercy on Lyra, who had nothing more to lose and had nowhere to fall. But Celine didn't want to do that. Although the frequency was lower than before, she used to wake up even when she was sleeping with a cold sensation around her neck. She wondered if this moment was a lie, and she doubted that it was a dream. So she had to give back Lyra the same pain to prove that this moment was not a lie. Simply losing her life was not enough. She had to see clearly that it was none other than Lyra who was tricked by the maids and would make her crazy. That was how she felt her life would be in the original place, not as a wicked woman who had ended her life stupidly in the past, but as a newly born and recognized Celine. Chapter 239. As I told you, there's no way I'm going to hate you for that. Rather, you are so cleverly organized that I feel relieved, said Asher, as he held Celine's worried hand more tightly. I'm just a little worried that there's nothing I can do to help. Don't worry. Everything is going smoothly. When this is over, everything will go back to normal. My nightmares will also come to an end. If you need me anytime, let me know. Whatever it is, I'm willing to help you. Thank you. I haven't seen you in a long time, but I'm making the mood weird. It's not weird. No matter what the story is, I enjoy every moment with you. So do I. Celine regained her smile again and made a bright one to Asher. She could only smile that bright because she was really running toward the end. Soon everything would be arranged, and she would have a new life. Because of you. Annie, who had been unable to move for a while after the carriage left, soon vented her anger on Lyra. She thought she would wear a dress prepared by Baron Burboom and play the noblewoman, but she had to take such an intruder with her. I don't want to follow you, Annie. Lyra also spoke very coldly, apparently not wanting to accompany Annie. But the two, who were unable to convey the words to the very person who had made the situation this way, gritted their teeth with sharp hostility toward each other. And unfortunately, the Baron of Burboom arrived at the mansion before things were sorted out. You've already come out. Even the Baron of Burboom, who confirmed that quite a crowd had gathered in the garden, asked with a very surprised look. Baron Burboom. Annie hurriedly changed her face and smiled broadly to greet Baron Burboom. In this exciting situation, the servants began to observe Annie, Baron Burboom and Lyra, holding their breath without returning to the mansion. You're as beautiful as I thought. Thank you. You look great, too. That's a great compliment. Like other lovers, Baron Burboom, who showed his love for Annie, said that they were running out of time and reached out. He meant to start. If it had been, as usual, she would have raised her chin to the fullest extent and held his hand as if to boast to everyone, but not now. The matter with Lyra remained. Celine had left after asking for a favor, but Annie couldn't take Lyra with her, but if she took Lyra with her, her date would be disturbed, and she didn't like that. As the silence continued for a moment, Jessica, who had been wary of the situation, stung Annie on the back and spoke quietly to her privately. Annie, Our Lady asked you to go with Lyra. Don't cause unnecessary trouble. It turns out that Lyra is a good girl, too. Jessica was the one who had had counseling in Lyra's distress, and she also had sympathy for her. As she sided with Lyra and urged Annie, who had no other choice, rolled her eyes and breathed a small sigh as if she had made up her mind. I'm sorry, Mr. Baron, but we should give a ride to a maid. I see. You can do that. I thought you were going to say something about interrupting our time. Unlike the Crown Prince, who had pleaded and complained to Celine, Baron Burboom immediately answered that she could do that, and Annie's discontent grew. Let's go, Lyra. Lyra? So when she called Lyra's name in a feeble voice, Baron Burboom stared at Lyra with a look of surprise. The look of the Baron of Burboom stiffened as he saw the Lyra of the rumor following Annie. Why does Lyra accompanying Annie? No, it was a face full of questions as to why she became Annie's maid. It was Annie, who noticed that, but was so upset by her irritation with Lyra and her disappointment with Baron Burboom that she didn't add any other explanation, and no conversation was exchanged in the carriage until they finally arrived at Corinne's wedding. Starting late, Annie and Baron Burboom's carriage arrived at the mansion of Marquis Vincent before Celine and Asher's. This was because Baron Burboom, who failed to overcome the silence, urged his driver. It was also thanks to Celine and Asher, who had deliberately circled the capital once. Then Annie, who got out of the carriage in an unpleasant mood, had to be distracted by the fancy carriage that had just entered the Marquis's mansion. Oh, my God, look at that wagon. Whose wagon is it? Isn't it the Crown Prince's carriage? Look at the emblem. Oh, it's true. So are they in that carriage, His Highness the Crown Prince and Lady Celine? This is their first time attending a place like this, right? I'm more excited. It was quite natural that everyone's eyes were on the most splendid wagon in the empire. Visitors, who had arrived first, were clamoring for what Celine and the Crown Prince would look like. And the visitors, who had gathered, opened their eyes wide by Celine's figure, who got off the wagon, escorted by Asher taking his hand, and couldn't hide their admiration. Oh my God. I don't know if it's because of her coming of age, but she's literally shining. She's not even a noblewoman anymore, but how can she be so beautiful? That's a natural beauty, regardless of status. While they were looking at Celine and Asher, envy was added to their matching outfits. As she watched from behind, Lyra spoke to herself so quietly that it could only be heard by Annie. She is the same commoner, but she's so different from you. What? Of course, Annie was angered by what heard, and Baron Burboom, who had no knowledge of the reason, opened his eyes wide and looked at Annie. What's the matter? That's... How can I say that I was angry because I was compared to Lady Celine? It was very sarcastic but not wrong. Annie would look like a fool if she told the truth. So when she couldn't say anything, she could see Lyra smiling contentedly. Lyra looked as if she felt relieved since she was able to bully Annie little. How dare you? Unlike Lyra, who has fallen into the abyss, now I will be a baroness. Annie, who had lost her patience, raised her voice as if she had a good idea after shaking her fist. Lyra. Lady Celine is here, so go see her. Annie shouted Lyra's name so loudly that everyone around them looked at their direction and was startled. Did she say Lyra? Someone mumbled, asking if what she heard was right. And Annie again called Lyra's name in return. Lyra. Lyra. What are you doing without answering? It was in a flash that the eyes of the congregation turned sharp. Everyone's murderous eyes began to focus on the wicked woman, who had dared to lay the sin on Celine and tried to sell off the empire. Lyra. The voice reached Celine, who was far away, as Annie called her name again in the quiet garden. Lyra became pale because she was being criticized by everyone, and Annie was smiling calmly as if she knew nothing. And Celine bit her lip and managed to hide her feelings because she felt like she was going to burst into laughter at the scene that was beyond what she had hoped for. How could such a wicked woman be in such a sacred place? She has no shame. Don't tell me she's going to do something to harm Lady Corinne this time, isn't she? I guess that's what she is trying to do. She looks vicious. No one could stand the torrent of abuse. Lyra, who had become pale, took hold of her head and began to tremble as if she were about to fall, and Baron Burboom beside her was embarrassed and rolled his eyes, not knowing what to do. Celine, who had been watching this for a while, laughed. What are you afraid of so much? In the past, you have repeatedly criticized me. Not long ago, you invited the young ladies to the mansion to insult me or show up at my birthday party to make me feel embarrassed, asking why I didn't invite you. Thinking of those memories, Celine was wondering if she would let this continue until Lyra fainted, but soon she decided to quit the idle entertainment because of Corinne's embarrassed face and called her name. Lyra. You've arrived here first. It's a fun day after a while, but you don't look so good. As Celine, who held Asher's hand, took a step, the crowd began to open up a way for her. Chapter 240. The eyes that had focused on Lyra began to scatter away at Celine, who took a graceful step as if nothing had happened. What's the matter? Huh? Lyra? Then Celine, who took her hand away from Asher as she arrived at her destination, touched Lyra's pale cheek. Her eyes were full of anxiety. Who made you so humiliated? Don't you think you should take revenge as you always did? I know how to do that, how you make a very stupid choice and destroy yourself like me in the past. Lyra? When she called Lyra's name with all her heart, she took Celine's hand with tears in her eyes. Sister. Celine found a servant to help her as she pressed her heart to drop the hand of Lyra, who cried and held her. If she dropped her hand here, everything would be in vain. Lyra is not feeling well, so she needs some time to rest. I brought her out after a while, but it hurts me to see how sick she is. The confession that it was Celine, who had brought Lyra, took a touch of sharpness from the eyes of spectators. Instead, it was the lamentation and admiration for Celine. How can she take care of the person who tried to hurt her? What's the matter? In the meantime, the butler of the mansion appeared, dispelling the commotion. It was the wedding of his master that he had prepared with great care, and he did not seem to like the unpleasant situation that happened suddenly. Lyra is not good. The look on his face made Celine feel sorry for ruining the wedding, but it was a trivial matter that would not remain in everyone's memory anyway. Today's main character, Corinne, would not know this trivial matter that would soon disappear. Can I borrow a carriage if you have one left? I think I'd have to send her back to the mansion. So when she told him she would let Lyra go back to avoid further damage, the butler bowed politely and quickly disappeared as if he was waiting for the words. All right. I'll be ready soon. Please wait for a moment. Lyra, wait a little bit. At Celine's worried words, Lyra, who closed her eyes tightly, nodded. She looked very pitiful, but no one sympathized with her because she had done so much in the meantime. The butler, who reappeared very quickly, was with the carriage. What he brought was a luxury carriage for the guests of the mansion. It was a carriage that was not suitable for Lyra, who was a commoner, but it seemed to have been prepared to make Celine look good. Thank you. Celine, who admired the butler's sense, briefly thanked him and helped Lyra into the carriage. Lyra, go back to the mansion and rest. Tell the butler to call the doctor. Okay? Although Lyra asked for a doctor, the butler would not listen to her. Celine closed the carriage without giving her any more words. That way, she would get even sadder. Then, as if waiting, the carriage set off, and at last, the real wicked woman disappeared and the bright laughter slowly began to reverberate in the mansion of Marquis Vincent, and it was entirely reborn as a place of blessing. I hope Lyra is safe. As Celine sounded worried, Asher put his hand on Celine's shoulder. He consoled her, so she would not worry. In fact, he knew she wasn't worried about Lyra. She must be surprised. She's been fine in that poor prison, and I'm sure she'll be fine. Please take away your worries. I'm glad then. Mississippi. Instead, you should visit the Marquise. I'm sure she'll be waiting for you. And similarly, Annie, who knew Celine wasn't worried about Lyra, changed the subject, to change the mood. Shall I? Corinne must have been waiting for a long time, right? Yes. You're best friends with the Marquise. Celine took the bait and changed her expression as she did not want to put any more emotion into Lyra. The Marquise asked me to let her know as soon as you arrive. I'll guide you right away. When even the butler also informed that, the traces of Lyra, who had been trembling, disappeared completely, and instead, there was the beautiful star of the empire that would be the crown princess in the future, whom everyone admired wherever she took a step. Celine. Corinne. Corinne greeted Celine's visit with full joy. She turned around quickly, apparently worried that Celine might not be able to come because of something unpleasant. There was relief in Corinne's eyes when she saw the image of the harmless Celine. Congratulations on your marriage. You are beautiful. Celine looked at Corinne and said with sincerity. Corinne was dressed in a classy, elegant dress that really suited the only mistress of the Marquis family of the empire. It was perfect except for the tiara, whether she had already been ready. Thank you. I don't know what to do as you say so. Should I call you the Marquise now? I think it would be a little sad to be called by you that way, so please call me Corinne as you always do. Usually, people change when they take over a higher position. However, Corinne, who had become the only Marquise of the empire starting today, had very pure and innocent eyes, just as Celine had seen at first. There was not an inch of doubt or mistrust in the eyes of Celine, who had just appeared before her after acting to drive Lyra to the brink of the cliff. Celine faced her pupils for a moment, hoping that Corinne would not know her plan until the end, and suddenly, Corinne grinned and opened her mouth. By the way, there's something Lady Celine can do for me. Me? Yes, and it's also what I want to do at Celine's wedding, said Corinne, pointing to a tiara in front of her. A maid, who was waiting next to her, carefully picked up the tiara and brought it to Celine. I want you to put this tiara on my head. Me? Yes. I wanted to arrange the dress and think about it together, but we couldn't because we were too busy. So I want you to put the tiara that completes me today on top of my head. I want you to do it by yourself. But this is... It was common for a mother to put a tiara on the bride's head. As for clothes and ornaments, close acquaintances would help her, but not with a tiara. So when she hesitated, Corinne began to urge Celine, saying she had no time, even though it wasn't a very short time. Come on. We'll be late for the wedding ceremony. Corinne didn't know if she had just caused a little disturbance at this elaborate wedding. Celine carefully reached out her hand and held the tiara in her hand. The tightness of the luxurious jewels weighed more than it looked. It was like Corinne's character of much consideration, unlike she looked outward. As Celine was slowly taking it over Corinne's head, Corinne lowered her head a little to help her. When she put the tiara on her hair, maids fixed it as if they had waited. It was because there was a superstition that if it fell by mistake, the bride would suffer bad luck. The flashy tiara seemed unlikely to match Corinne's simple and graceful face, but it suited Corinne better than Celine thought. Thank you. I think this will help me finish today's wedding safely. How can Corinne always trust and like me? There was no need to take advantage of Corinne anymore, but Celine, who recalled her approach to Corinne with impure intentions from the start, put her hand on her chest. Somehow, she felt a tingling sensation. Corinne, who did not know that, was still looking straight at Celine with a look of trust. Corinne, you are my dear friend throughout my life. She was a dear friend who would never be seen again throughout the past and the present. It was a sudden and unexpected remark, but it was sincere. You too. With a gentle nod to Celine's most serious face, Corinne still responded with a bright smile. Corinne's wedding, like the only Marquise' wedding in the empire, was very grand and splendid. Even the emperor, who was extremely careful and was not going out, briefly showed his face, and the visitors were also splendid. The ceremony began, and Celine saw Corinne and Marquis Vincent put a ring on their finger, of which the size and beauty were unusual, and she said quietly, holding the hand of Asher sitting next to her. I like blue. Yes?